I don't know.
Should be a little control over here.
Are you calling me short?
Just a little bit.
I think it does.
Here's Hall. You can just make sure you don't.
Well,
lean too far
yeah,
this
let's
way. You start
do
leaning
both.
out of the
Yeah,
frame,
it was
don't
fine
go
the way
right
you did it.
or to the right.
Okay. Sounds good.
Hello and welcome to St. Louis, the capital of chess in the United States, where an epic match, the Battle of the Legends between two great players, is about to take place, and it should be an incredible matchup. Welcome everyone, I am Maurice Ashley along with Grandmaster Alejandro Ramirez.
Sir, a pleasure to be here.
Alejandro, this should be a lot of fun. Well, this matchup features former world champion Garry Kasparov, who was one of the top players in history. I mean, his record speaks for itself. And he's playing against a challenger, Nigel Short, who he had a great match with. Actually, it was a pretty one-sided match back in 1993. But Alejandro, Nigel has been playing a lot of chess lately. He's won tournaments recently. He's been quite busy. And although people think that the numbers may be one-sided, it may be in Nigel's favor this match because he lacks the rust.
Well, I like to start saying how much of an honor it is for me to be able to witness such an event. I grew up with books that reference Nigel Short versus Garry Kasparov and their matches and their games, but I never got to see them actually play.
Well, I got to see them. I'm a little older than you, so I did get to see them.
And for me to actually be able to witness this, it's fantastic.
Well, they do have a historic matchup, as you see there. Kasparov really dominated the classical games. 24 wins to only 2 by Nigel, but Short was able to come back and win a lot of the rapid or exhibition matches, their matchup there being 14-7. So is it to his advantage today, Nigel being, as I said, so much in shape that he may be the one to have the edge here in this matchup? Kasparov hasn't played in many years.
Well, Kasparov has 10 years of not playing professional chess, while Nigel Short comes in winning the Thailand Open only, a week ago? He won Gibraltar, a super strong Open 2 years ago, ahead of Ho Yifan, ahead of many 2700s. We're talking about a player that isn't just kind of keeping up with chess. This is a top 100 player right now. He's active, he's strong, he travels, he plays. So can Kasparov keep up with this?
That's a funny question to be asking now. Can Kasparov keep up? Well, let's take a look at the format of the event. We see here that, first of all, there are going to be 2 rapid games, but today we just start with the 25 minutes with a 10-second delay, a very interesting format to decide for this match. And then we will follow with 4 blitz game of 5 minutes each with a 3-second delay. Now, delays are not popular these days. Alejandro, what do you think why did the players decide on a delay instead of the normal increment, which gives them additional time?
Well, it'll be interesting to watch. It's definitely a little bit of a funky format. Most tournaments in Europe and most professional blitz tournaments use increments. So, for example, the FIDE World Championship for blitz uses 3 minutes plus 2 seconds, and the normal FIDE World Championship for rapid is 25 minutes plus 10 seconds. So instead of using it as instead of increment delay, we're going to see a little bit different. The players will have to adjust to using delay as opposed to increment, and we'll see who adjusts the fastest.
And delay is interesting because the time freezes and 10 seconds is going by. The clock will indicate the 10 seconds transpiring, but the players will sort of not even feel it, right? Because it's just happening, and then all of a sudden the clock starts again and your time is ticking down. Now, how will that affect maybe the time scrambles?
It's incredibly deceiving. At least when you have increment, you know exactly what you're looking at. But a delay, you always have this uncomfortable feeling, do I play now? Do I wait 1 more second? And it seems silly, but that 1 second can change the entire course of the match.
And the delay, it's sort of like your time is not really running down, so you get the feeling that your time is frozen, which is a sort of an unnatural feeling in competition as well. We see there the clock showing the 25 minutes. Now, going back now to this idea of the rapid matches, the rust factor for Garry Kasparov. And here we see Tony Rich on screen with Nigel Short. I'm not sure if Nigel seems a bit confused by looks like by the rules itself, by the delay. I thought the players had agreed on this beforehand, but it looks as though Nigel himself is a bit perturbed.
Actually, when I first came to America, right, they're explaining basically what I had problems with was what exactly is this delay? I was so used to increment. So I think Nigel is a little flabbergasted at the moment.
I mean, he actually really does look flabbergasted is a good word. I mean, he even looks a bit ticked off, if I may say so. I would have thought that the players would have agreed on this beforehand and shouldn't have come as a surprise just sitting down to play in the tournament. But there he is sitting as he waits for Garry Kasparov to show up. We see a big crowd in the audience, and he's going to have to clear his head. What kind of effect might this have on his thoughts going into the game?
I think he's adjusting right now. He realizes that this is a faster game than he's used to. If you play professional games, you're used to 25 minutes, 10-second increment, and that is actually considerably longer than delay. You can blitz out a couple of moves and get your clock back to a decent position. If, for example, you drop down to 10 seconds, bam, blitz, 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 suddenly you have a minute. But with delay, that never happens. Once you get to 10 seconds, that's it. You have the 10 seconds plus the 10 seconds delay, and you will never have more thinking time than that. Right now, he's adjusting a little bit his thinking. What do I do different? How do I manage my time? These are key factors for a game that's only 25 minutes long.
And as you're saying, it doesn't matter really what the time control is, if you will. But if you're used to one thing, it could be very difficult to adjust, especially if you hadn't thought about it, that it was coming when you were coming into the match.
Right. Sometimes we just kind of assume, and as a Grandmaster, I've been guilty of this in many tournaments where I just go and I assume the time control. I assume it's this because it's the most populist.
As we see here, Kasparov strolling in, and Nigel getting up for the normal handshake there. Garry Kasparov, a legend, taking off his jacket early. Now, normally when Kasparov removes the jacket, it's because he's getting down to business. We normally see him with the jacket on, the watch on. I've called many of his matches, and that's usually a telltale moment when he takes the jacket off. But it's clear that he is down to business already, although you see him in quite good spirits there, adjusting his pieces, everything right. And there goes the watch.
There goes the watch.
That means it's really down to business immediately. He knows that he's facing a dangerous challenge here. He has not played in a while. I want to imagine what his practice matches have been and who he's been practicing against. We know he's been coaching Magnus Carlsen, and he's coached Hikaru Nakamura. He's coached some of the youngsters as well. But who do you think he's been practicing with for this particular match?
Well, actually, I know that Nigel Short was on playchess.com earlier today playing against several opponents, trying to warm up for the match. I'm not sure about Garry or what his preparations are at the moment, but I'm assuming that he found some, 2750, 2700 that will be glad to play blitz games with him. So I'm sure that he's not completely rusty coming in. I remember that Magnus Carlsen was mentioning when he had his practice sessions with Garry that, yeah, he was a little rusty and you could tell, but the guy was still a beast. I mean,
well, the beast from Baku, indeed. And let us go up to Tony Rich, the director of the Chess Club and Scholastic Center of St. Louis, as he tells us the rules of the match.
Welcome to the Battle of the Legends, hosted here at the Chess Club and Scholastic Center of St. Louis. The two men before me need absolutely no introduction, but I'll be happy to let you know that Grandmaster Nigel Short and Grandmaster Garry Kasparov will face each other head-to-head over the next 2 days in a series of rapid and blitz games. With regards to format, they'll play this rapid game, and then they'll have 4 blitz games. Tomorrow, same schedule, 1 rapid game followed by 4 blitz games. The time control is game in 25 minutes with a 10-second delay for the rapid portion, and the blitz portion is game in 5 minutes with a 3-second delay. I can tell both of our players are very focused and ready to go.
Well, you see
And
Tony
I
there.
have no
Now,
further
Tony is sort of at the center of some rules issues lately, particularly with Wesley. So he's actually even been known to forfeit Rex Singfield in the match that they had here. And the players about to start. Already we had the little rule issues, and they have begun the match. The game's beginning now. You see them playing the moves, and D4, E6 has been played. D4, E6, and now knight to F3.
it seems like Garry wants a normal d4 kind of position. Nigel probably trying to mix it up a little bit. He's playing with this funky move e6, which gives white so many options. You can play against the French, you can play an early g3, but we're going to be seeing a typical Queen's Indian or Benoni maybe after c5. d5 also a very logical and common move in this position.
Tons of possibilities now, and after c4, it's clear that Kasparov doesn't mind going into theory. And not like Kamsky, who sometimes plays bishop f4, a London system, when he wants to be quiet.
Not at all. He's going for the throat. He's definitely going for theoretical battle. We'll see how much of this Nigel Short bites into.
interesting, especially from Nigel's standpoint, that Garry has decided to go right into a potential main line and bishop to b4 check. The so-called Bogo Indian has been played now. Knight b to d2.
Right, this Bogo Indian kind of style, a little bit more positional, definitely not as theoretical. Here, there are not going to be any great novelties. There's been a little bit of theory seen here recently, but it hasn't been such a big deal. It's not the most explored path. We have a very early c5 that, as far as I'm concerned, is not the most precise move, but it's a rapid game. Maybe he's trying to mix things up a little bit. I was never a very big fan of this c5 idea because of all the weaknesses that is left by the pawn, and with the bishop already out of the pawn structure, it will have to be traded for the knight on d2. So we're going to have to see if Garry goes for an early a3, forcing that bishop to disappear from the board, and then try to exploit the remaining dark square issues.
And with c5 on the board, we should note that the clocks, it seems as though the clocks are reversed at the moment. That's what I'm noticing, because Garry is thinking, as in he has the white pieces, and on the left, the clock is blinking. So the clocks are reversed. That we're going to have to pay attention to as the match goes on, and I'm sure we'll fix that technical detail later in the match. But for now, Garry is looking at this move c5, and it seems to have caught him a little bit unawares.
Well, he's not even looking at the board, and when you play Grandmasters, it's actually something that's quite common. They stop looking at the board when they're trying to remember something. They don't want to analyze anymore. They just want to think, wait, where have I seen this before? What's different? What's new? And even though we've only played 4 moves of chess, this c5 move is a little strange, so I'm not surprised Garry will take at least a couple of minutes to figure out where his footing is, what his plan's going to be, and then maybe blitz out 3 or 4 moves in a row.
What's kind of funny is Garry's mannerisms. Garry is not one to hold back the way he feels, and you will see it immediately. You look at his face, the way he's looking up, and he's already seeming a little bit disturbed by this move order, trying to figure out why would this guy play this move against me, especially as you mentioned that maybe it's a little bit dubious move, or maybe not precise, but certainly Short has prepared this line and knows a thing or two and is trying to catch Garry in some homebrew.
Short is a very practical player. He always has these ideas, and even if they're not entirely sound, he knows about them, he knows about the refutation, and he knows more or less how not to get into a difficult position, or at least one that's not too difficult, while still understanding that if my opponent doesn't play precisely, here I have all the antidotes. And he's a very meticulous person when it comes to knowing what to do after the opening. I've always been amazed that in so many theoretical Sicilians, Nigel Short, even though he's not the most theoretical player in the world, knows that when theory ends, this is my plan, I execute it perfectly.
And a3 has been played. Bishop takes knight on d2 instantly, so Short definitely still in his preparation, and Kasparov knows that he has sort of been slightly outdone here just at the very beginning of the game because his opponent is extremely comfortable, and that's a big danger for him, especially if he just walks into immediate equality for black and maybe even some dynamic possibilities that he did not analyze beforehand. And it is clear that he is the one who is not as comfortable just from how quickly Nigel is moving and how slowly Garry is already starting to move.
Of course, but at the same time, I think that he's going to be happy if he does manage to find some precise moves, get a slight advantage, and torture his opponent from here. The most common idea here is to take with the queen in order to preserve the option for the bishop on c1 to go to b2 later in the game, and also to take on d4 with the queen in certain instances, since it allows the queen to target d6 immediately. So both moves here possible, bishop takes d2 and queen takes d2 are possible. It's going to be up to Garry which one he decides, but theory never really said one is much better than the other.
It is kind of funny, though, watching how much he's thinking in a rapid game this early on. We've only played 5 moves, and you would expect at least 10 moves on the board very quickly. So definitely caught in something here, and he's trying to calculate his way out of it. I don't see that being necessary. You think, why not just make a move? There's no way to totally calculate anything here. It's just too early in the game. Or maybe he's trying to remember some things about this kind of line.
I have the feeling that he's just trying to come up with a game plan. There are several ways of developing here for white. You can take with the queen and then go g3, bishop g2. You could take with the bishop and then go e3 and bishop d3.
And he has taken with the queen.
Right. And so there's so many different ways that you can develop your pieces. He's probably just trying to figure out which one do I want to play. It's not so much that he's maybe calculating his way out of it. He's trying to go for the pros and cons in c5 and see which one punishes him the most.
And a capture on d4. C takes d4. Now the question, do you take with the queen, as you mentioned, or do you take back with the knight?
Now, you can actually just ignore the pawn and go g3 if you'd like. I'm not sure if there's any real benefit to doing so, but there is no danger for the pawn going anywhere.
Now he's ripped that pawn off right away. Knight takes on d4. And he has the two bishops for the moment, but he spent some time getting that position. His queen and bishop on c1 in particular will have to figure out how to develop. What's the advantage here for black, though? What does black gain from trading off that dark square bishop and allowing white to get a little bit of extra space?
Well, he does have the ability in the future to have more central pawns. That typical Sicilian idea of trading a c pawn for a d pawn is important. He's also somewhat style white's development, since, as you mentioned, the bishop on c1 cannot move out immediately. And overall, as I said, I'm not a huge fan of this setup, but if he can...
For what color?
For black.
For black.
For black. And if for some reason he puts his pawns on b6, d6, and manages to cover everything in the dark squares, then he might be okay. But as I said, pair of bishops, a little more space. I always prefer to be white. On the other hand, as compensation for it, he's up on time a little bit.
And we see there the clocks have been adjusted. On the left is black pieces, and on the right is for the white pieces, and Short has castled in this position. I would assume that he's going to play d5 quite quickly and look to open up the game as fast as possible to take advantage of the initiative that he has, since white has taken some time spending moves, moving pawns like a3 and even c4.
Right, and here's the danger. Garry played a quick e3. He doesn't want to play g3 in this position because then the move d5 would come extremely quickly, and once I take the pawn, he would take with the queen, and that's really awkward for white to finish his development. So he plays a very quick e3. Now d5, even though it's possible to play, doesn't have the same kind of power to it. It doesn't threaten as many things because of the e3 control over the center, controlling d4. Therefore, the avalanche of pawns with e5 and d4, not nearly as strong. Still, probably a very logical move to try to play d4, make the pawn structure symmetrical.
And d5 has indeed been played, and option to capture on d5 three different ways: queen, knight, or pawn. I think the pawn is probably the worst of the three in this situation.
It's definitely the most unnatural. You don't want to give yourself an isolated pawn for basically no reason, especially when it seems that taking with the queen doesn't have any real drawback.
And he has indeed captured with the queen, preventing the bishop from f1 from easily developing into the game. And now black will have what seemed to be an easy time of it, bringing his pieces out, but Kasparov has instantly banged down knight to b5, looking to get a knight into c7, a basic trap we all know as beginners, trapping the rook on that square and looking to trade off queens and go into maybe a superior endgame with his two bishops. A very concrete decision and made very quickly by Kasparov.
And I really like this decision. It goes into a solid endgame. It's no risk. It's a lot of deficiencies here for black. This pair of bishops, it doesn't seem like much. But the more the game progresses, we'll see that these pair of bishops become stronger and stronger and stronger, and black's dark squares are really going to suffer at some point. There's no stopping this dark squared bishop once I get a structure such as f3 and then e4, putting my bishop on e3 at a later point, targeting this queen side.
Yeah, that dark squared bishop is going to be key after we saw the exchange on d2. Bishop takes knight. Now Nigel has to sit back and think about this. How is he going to get any play? If white is able to develop naturally, this is going to be very difficult for black, despite the equal pawn structure. I mean, that's the only thing black has to hang his hat on. Maybe he can somehow trade off this dark square bishop. I'm not sure what you would suggest here. Maybe trade on d2 and play a knight e4. That seems, after knight c6 and play for that idea.
Right, but I'm not going to let you. I might just play f3 immediately, taking control over that square. So for example, after takes knight c6, I could immediately go f3, threatening to go e4 at the next move. I want my pawns on light squares, so my dark squared bishop has more space. But he surprised us. Nigel did not trade queens. He retreated to c6. A little bit of an awkward move, but at the same time, I can see the reasoning behind it. The queen still guards this g2 square, therefore the bishop on f1 cannot really move. and the queen is controlling the position on c7. Therefore,
Fascinating move. Fascinating move. Stopping the knight c7, as you said, but also usually a queen on c6, the knight goes to c6, so that's one thing he loses. The other thing is a rook might end up on the c file, but if white can't castle early by moving this bishop out, then it's all for naught, right? So the challenge is, does black have enough time to develop his pieces and maybe play a rook to d8 and chase this queen around and prove that he has some initiative for this weird place he's put his queen? Because clearly c6 is a bizarre square, and you see Garry already looking, again, disturbed. It's incredible how emotional he is when he plays chess. I don't think I've ever seen anyone as emotional as Garry Kasparov at the chessboard. Any of the top players, anyway.
I mean, the only one that comes close is Hikaru Nakamura.
I was going to say Nakamura is the one guy, but not like this guy. He's even more anti-poker face, if you will. I mean, when he is not happy, you see it. When he's confused, when he's befuddled, and even when he's angry, you see it on his face. And he's looking at this move now, thinking, how do I punish this guy? But at the same time, maybe the moves are not that easy.
And it happened one every million moves, but when he did miss something, wow, his reactions were absolutely legendary. I remember when he missed in a rapid game something against Anand. That made YouTube. That made millions of hits. I mean, it's just fantastic to see him over the board. His energy, his passion, you can see it on his face.
Even when we had the match here, the match when he was playing with Rex Singfield, and the match with Carlson and all those guys were here that we called, even there, everyone was taking it cordially. Everyone was, it's like, we're having a good time. There was one guy, when he sat down, you could feel the cobra come out. Just sat there like, I'm going to destroy you. And the whole room went quiet. Whenever it was his turn, the whole room would go quiet. Nobody would trash talk. Like almost respect for the legend and his fighting ability. And there he is, hunkering down, looking at this last move, queen to c6.
And he just played the move f3, which is very similar to what I had just suggested. He wants to take control over e4. He wants to play e4 himself. He's not so worried about finishing his development immediately because he wants to make sure that the bishop on c1 has a very comfortable square at some point to go to e3, maybe f4. He's not so worried about the queen move to c6. He knows that Nigel, to finish his development, must move the queen again, and that will be done either immediately by playing queen b6, with the idea of a rook d8, or by first kicking out the knight with a6, and after knight d4, maybe knight c3, but knight d4 also natural move, then queen b6 or c7.
Is it possible maybe Nigel can get something on the d file as fast as he can? Maybe play for e5 himself, stopping a knight from going to d4, and then bring his bishop out to e6, and then try to get the knight out, and then the b8 knight out, and then bring the rook to the d file, and try to get some play. Otherwise, he's going to get squashed slowly. I mean, if Kasparov gets maybe 3 or 4 free moves, and you just let him stroll down the park, I mean, he's going to absolutely find a way to put his pieces on great squares, and then Nigel's just going to be worse.
He's going to have to do something now. That's why Nigel Short's thinking. That's why he's not playing something random, something natural, some developing move. He really needs to find something concrete at this point, and it's exactly what you said. You gave Kasparov a couple of moves to set up his bishops, to set up his pieces, and Nigel's going to face something very, very, very uncomfortable.
So what moves can we talk about here? E5 looks like an idea, but A6, as you suggested as well, has been played, A6, and he's going to have to move that knight. Probably D4 is a natural square, gaining a tempo on the black queen. So right. Move A6, we anticipate that idea, but it still is losing a little bit of time. I mean, it's not like he's gaining time because knight D4 is going to gain time back.
Well, yes. At the same time, I think this is going to be a battle even further from that. I expect the knight to retreat to c3, because if he goes knight d4, then after the queen moves, and the queen wants to move anyways, e5 is going to be an issue. So I expect the knight to go to c3, actually.
And it looks like he has moved it.
Indeed, yeah.
I think he has moved it, as you said, knight c3, and e5 and e4 very quickly by Kasparov. And now white only needs 2 more moves. 2 more moves to get castled. That's one thing. Black looks as though he can play bishop e6 and then maybe bring his knight out as fast as possible and then get on that d file.
Yeah, he wants to take control over d4. If he manages to take control over d4, he's in an okay position. But the problem is how to do this. He needs to move the queen, he needs to move the rook, the knight has to come to c6 and d4. It takes some time. And even then, the position, I mean, you have the pair of bishops. It's a little more comfortable for white. However, I don't see any other plan. He really needs to go for the d4 square, in my opinion.
Now, what if they trade off a pair of bishops, like bishop to e6 with the eventual idea of putting it on c4 and trading off these bishops? Will that position be much worse for white, given that the two bishops, I mean, much worse for black, I mean, given that the two bishops are off the board? Or will the dark square bishop still be a dominant piece?
I think the dark square bishop is still going to be important, but it's definitely easier to play against only one bishop. It's a very common idea in the game of chess that when you're facing the pair of bishops, you want to at least swap one of the pairs of bishops on the board so that only one bishop remains for your opponent's side, and it doesn't coordinate as well with the knight.
And now an intriguing idea after knight b to d7. Kasparov has instantly moved his queen to f2, queen f2 as a choice, getting his queen off the diagonal, but also off the threat of the knight going to c5 and then knight to b3.
Absolutely natural move. The queen belongs on f2. It liberates e3 square, and it's completely anti-knight bd7. I was thinking of playing queen f2 anyways.
Hold on a second. Let's just get caught up on the board because they're making a couple of moves quite rapidly. So let's see if we can catch up with the board position. And there it is. So the last couple of moves, the knight has landed on the b3 square. He's quickly developed, and he's also trying to get his knight into d4. So those last couple of moves, a knight to c5, a bishop on e6, a knight on b3, white has developed, and it looks as though white has just one step away from castling, and then he'll be perfectly okay. Is this now a real advantage for white with those two bishops?
It's the same as it was before. I think that white's a little bit better. It's maybe nothing too exciting. It's nothing too bad for short, but it is unpleasant. The knight on b3, what can I say? It looks better than it is. The knight doesn't really have any targets. It's not really doing much. Actually, the best square the knight can go to is back to d4. And since that's basically the best square it has, I'm wondering what benefit it has on b3 than on c6, which I thought was a much more natural square for it.
Well, he didn't have to move his queen off of c6 anyway. He brought his knight to d7 and then to c5 and then to this b3
So you
square.
saved the tempo by not moving the queen, but you used 3 to get it to b3.
Exactly.
So for me, it's a little questionable. But at the same time, okay, white's advantage is small. It's still a little bit contained. It's just that I think the pair of bishops eventually does matter. Here, I think what Kasparov is most worried about is exactly the plan that you were mentioning of bishop c4 at some point, trading off the pair of bishops, and then maybe short will be able to equalize.
Well, bishop e2 is now on the board, so I believe Kasparov did play bishop to e2, and bishop to c4 is a possibility, although it does potentially weaken the d5 square as well, but trading off bishops could be advantageous, and it's going to all be about, I think, the minor piece battle. This bishop on e3 versus one of those knights, and that knight on f6 looks like it doesn't have that much of a future. That knight needs to find a square eventually. Does it make sense maybe knight h5, knight f4 in some case?
It definitely makes sense, but the problem here is that the knight on f6, even though it's passive and even though it's not very well placed, it does need to defend d5. At some point, you cannot allow white to just go knight d5, force you to trade off your bishop, and then you have two knights against two bishops. That's the last position you want to see yourself against Garry Kasparov. So knight h5, knight f4, something that you would like to play, but I don't think Garry's going to give you that opportunity.
Yeah, and Garry definitely favors the two bishops. He knows those are powerful, a la Fischer as well. And he's looking, man, he looks hardcore right now. He's like, I'm covering everything. It looks normal. That look he had a few moments ago is gone, that perturbed look, and now rook to d8, and he looks away thinking about this move. A rook to d8 has been played, and it seems normal that he should just castle.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem like much to think about here. And he has a 2-minute and 47-second edge on the clock, and he has indeed castled.
It's the most natural. He's at some point going to threaten bishop b6, gaining control over this important d file. So even though currently black is challenging the d file, it's not going to be something permanent. It will become white's at some point.
That's an important point to make. We should take a look at that. Bishop to b6 is a critical move. Again, the dark squared bishop is the one piece that's different in the position, and that lack of harmony or lack of two pieces playing together is really critical. That bishop on b6, if he gets control of the d file, Now he's castled was his last move, so let's update that. If he gets full control of the D file, he might have something. But again, let's ask this question. What does white do to improve his position? I mean, optically it looks good. You know, you could take a selfie with this position. I got the 2 bishops, I got development, everything is good. But what do you do? How do you improve on the position that you've got? Maybe black has achieved some kind of stasis in the position and won't allow you to improve the position much, especially maybe if he plays b5 so that your bishop doesn't clamp down on that b6 square.
I think that at the moment, that's what Kasparov is really thinking about. It does seem a little awkward to make too much progress. I would really like to make my bishop on e2 a lot better than it is right now, but it doesn't seem that there's a clear path. I'm even thinking of crazy moves like g4, g5 to gain control over d5.
But look at this last move. I'm sorry to interrupt, but he just played knight back to e8. Knight back to e8. I guess avoiding maybe the bishop to g5 pin, but still, we were talking about this knight and we were saying the d5 square is of importance, and he's brought his knight back to e8, and it could also route itself, it looks like, to the queen side.
He's using the fact that at this precise moment, knight d5 is not a possibility. That's maybe why he played rook d8, and especially taking into consideration which rook he used. It's not so the rook on a8 can go to c8. It's simply that the knight can go back, and we have a couple of moves.
Well, we've seen just knight to e8.
And I think the knight's going to be routed to c4. That seems to me like the most logical end place for the knight. I'm a little worried about the fact that when I land on d6, I'm blocking my own rook. So knight d5 then becomes a possibility. But I don't imagine where else it could go, because if it goes to c7, I don't see a bright future for it.
So it just looks like timing issues right now. This knight being on this square, and at the same time, I don't think Kasparov can lollygag around and ignore this knight. If this knight appears on c4, black will be perfectly fine.
Absolutely.
I mean, there's no question about it.
No question about it. Right, and it's also a problem for Kasparov to improve here. How exactly do I make my position better? Bishop on b6 is always desirable, but at the same time, you don't want to leave the bishop on d6 for too long, especially on the way of knight d6, knight c4. If it ever comes, it hits the bishop on b6. So the problem here is, what move does Kasparov make that really improves his position?
And you talked about that bishop on e2. It doesn't look like a great piece, even though he has the 2 bishops. It's not like one of them is functioning quite well. So the knight on b3 may argue, you know, I'm the better minor piece. In this position, if the knight on d6 shows up on c4, there's going to be a lot of problems for white to improve anything at all. And Kasparov is now going into a significant thing. I think he realizes that this position is getting a little bit more serious. He can always trade off on the d file if he likes.
I think that's an excellent idea. If you trade off on the d file, it gives the bishop on e2 a little bit more space. I specifically like this square on d1 where it would hit the knight on b3, and that allows me to sometimes play knight d5 with a tempi. So I think that trading off everything might be a good idea. Also, because particularly in this position, the rook on f1 has no real future. Kasparov could be considering the move f4, but it's a little risky to play in such an anti-positional manner.
That's a lot risky.
Yeah, I mean, for the position, of course. But giving yourself an isolated pawn, not really creating anything concrete, it's strategically dubious.
Well, he's just played queen to g3, very specifically threatening the pawn on e5, which comes as a small surprise to me because f6 seems to be a move that black wanted to play in this position. What do you make of this move, queen g3, which, I mean, the kingside attack doesn't seem like it's going to lead anywhere anytime soon. So why just now?
Well, if he does play f6, you have to understand that this knight becomes even worse. And if your entire plan is to bring everything to the queen side, then maybe I can now do something on the king side. Suddenly my move f4 doesn't look as crazy, because if I'm able to actually bring more and more pieces into the king side, maybe I can justify playing something like this. Also, f6 has to be a little bit more careful because knight d5 will be coming in with ideas on this diagonal.
Well, f6 has been played, and Kasparov instantly whipped out f4. As you said, he is looking for an attack now, opening up lines for his bishop, trying to, for his bishops, both bishops, and trying to undermine the d4 square, so things are heating up quite rapidly. I find it hard to believe that black is in tremendous danger, but this is not the kind of situation you want to be in. Garry Kasparov on the attack. This guy is known to rip kings apart, rip them to shreds, and his ability to calculate is legendary. And instantly, knight to d4 has been played by short, and this is really throwing the game into lots of complications.
He has a very specific threat, right? If f takes e5, I believe I can take on c3, unless I'm missing something. Nope, I think this is a good move. And then after pawn takes e3, knight takes e2 check, would regain the queen with nice interest.
With interest, indeed.
Right.
That'd be other
And
piece.
the point is that after queen takes e3, if you first take on d4, of course the bishop is protected by the rook, but I have the intermediate move, queen takes, and after pawn takes, I think I have the move bishop b3. The idea is that I'm hitting the rook on d1, and after rook take d2, I have pawn takes e5. Now that might not be necessarily true because I just noticed that there's this pawn takes f6 intermediate move.
That's a killer because
So-
of f7 check. If you take on d1, let's show that line.
Right.
Bishop takes d1, f7,
check
and you can
is-
resign.
It looks pretty devastating after, for example, king f8. The simplest would be to simply take the knight. Maybe there's something stronger. And rook takes d1, and you have a winning material advantage.
Two amazing bishops in the position.
Right. So the question right now is, can I actually take on e5? Because if queen takes e3 is not a threat, I'm not entirely sure why this is not a free pawn. Maybe takes on e2 then. Takes on e2. Queen takes e4. This looks a little dangerous, but if I can get away with it.
Maybe you should capture the rook on d1 first so that you
Right.
don't have to worry about the f6 square.
So first take on d1, and now queen takes e4. Still a little suspicious, but if the best thing that white has is pawn takes, then after knight takes f6, it looks like you're okay.
Dead draw, an amazing line. I'm not sure that Short calculated all of those variations or it's just his instincts taking over in that situation, but it looks as though he is fine in that particular line, and Kasparov now beginning to calculate himself. Line is indeed sharpened. Is it sensible at all to take on d4 here? Bishop takes. That seems like it just doesn't make any sense in this position. Actually, he's played bishop to h5.
Right. Since he was unable to find any good concrete way of continuing, he simply saves the bishop. And he also saves the e4 pawn indirectly, since knight takes e2 is no longer a threat. The point is, okay, I'm attacking e5, I improve my bishop. Sometimes this e8 knight's going to be threatened in some variation. So I'm kind of forcing Short to show me why his knight on d4 is powerful. Yes, it's visually very appealing, but my attack is on the king side, not in the center. How is this knight on d4 influencing this attack on the king side? We're going to have to see if the knight can really come back and defend this king. It's just a little bit too far away.
But you say defend the king. It doesn't seem concretely yet like the king is under heavy pressure. There is some slight pressure on that side, but maybe Short can take over that diagonal, the diagonal that the bishop just left from, that f1, a6 diagonal. Maybe play something like bishop to c4 at some point.
Look, when you're playing Kasparov, it doesn't matter what the position is. Your king's always in danger. So you have to think about that. Bishop c4 does look like an interesting counterattack. You're attacking the rook on f1, and obviously Kasparov doesn't want to waste time moving that rook away from what is already a good square since you played f4. I could maybe put it on f2 and maybe ignore your threats, since there shouldn't be any decent tactic against my rook on e2, since it's defended by the bishop and by the knight.
It seems as though he has to take on f4. Like black just has to take on f4
At some point.
At some point. What if he
Right.
does it now?
If he takes it right now, I'm given options. I could take with the rook, which gains a tempo, since this knight on d4 is now under attack, and allows me maybe to swing the rook on the 4th rank somehow. And as I mentioned before, this bishop on h5 attacking the knight on e8, which is now the only defender of this pawn on f6, since the pawn on g7 is pinned by the queen. So at the moment, it would seem like rook f4 gains a tempo against the knight, and the pawn on f6 is under attack, so you would have to find some way of defending it. Maybe for this reason, interposing the move bishop c4 might be good. In that way, the queen on c6 is defending this pawn on f6 in the variation that we just saw.
So if rook f2 and then takes on f4?
Right, and then, well, maybe my position is still not amazing, but at least the pawn on f6 is not hanging, and I liberated my square on e6. Maybe I can move my knight back, gain a tempo against the rook. It seems like...
This is crazy.
Yeah, it does seem... Yeah, and bishop c4 was played.
This is definitely insane. That bishop on h5 is getting to me. I mean, just a bishop seems like it's offside. It's threatening the knight on e8, but without a concrete line, that bishop could prove itself misplaced as well. I mean, it's sideways. It's not like the white piece is coordinate extremely well, and Kasparov's going to have to figure out how to not to let his pieces get disjointed. I mean, that alone could be a problem in a position, although everything is connected, and he has ignored the threat to his rook on f1, and he has captured on e5, sacrificing in exchange immediately. That's a big decision. He's going to take the knight on d4, maybe.
Well, not necessarily. He can also take after bishop takes f1.
And that has been done. Bishop takes f1.
He can take on f1. And the idea is that if I take on e5, I might have some ideas involving bishop f7 check. And if the king moves, maybe the move bishop somewhere like d5.
Yeah.
With the idea of rook f8 checkmate, forcing you to do something like
Queen d6.
Well, queen d6 doesn't work because I take on... Oh, no, it does work. But I can take on e5. And
win another pawn.
Win another pawn. The knight's under attack.
And you can't play queen takes queen.
You cannot play queen takes queen because of
the nasty
checkmate.
mate on the back rank.
Exactly. So this looks a little uncomfortable. It doesn't seem like you want to allow this kind of bishop maneuvering. And you were just mentioning this bishop offside. Boom, on d5.
Back in business.
Best square on the board.
Absolutely.
How does this guy do it? I just don't understand. But f takes e5 doesn't seem like something you want to play. So after rook takes f1, and Garry's thinking about whether I want to take the knight or I want to take the bishop on f1, it doesn't seem like black can take back, which means there's a lot of pressure. There's knight d5 coming in, bishop takes c8, followed by e takes f6 will also be an idea.
Well, let's follow that line with bishop takes on d4, although there may be a counter sacrifice here. Bishop takes d4, can he play maybe rook takes on d4?
Absolutely. I mean, this would make black's position a lot more comfortable. You eliminate a very important bishop, and well, I do have, I believe, to take on d4. Well, I could take on f1, but I don't like this idea. Let's go for...
And now queen c5?
Queen c5, and then the idea is that when you defend the rook, probably with something like queen f2, I can maybe take on... No, I cannot take on e5 yet. Well, I can take with the queen. And maybe... No.
Well, no, in this line,
bishop
bishop takes on e8, but...
And then, yeah, just a deflection. Here, rook takes e8, and then...
And then take the bishop.
Take
No,
the
take
bishop,
with
sorry,
the king. With the king.
Sorry. Queen takes h2 is insufficient compensation for a full piece. So maybe this doesn't quite work.
But can he? Why couldn't he take on? Oh, of course.
Right. If he takes with the pawn, then
yeah,
queen f7.
Then queen f7 and the king.
King h8.
Let's follow that line.
Well,
the rook is now fully pinned with check, and the knight's coming to f6. I think this is fine for black.
Yeah, this should be fine for black. And since the queen is controlling f8, there shouldn't be any trickery. Even with the bishop going to f7, I can just move king h8, I think. That should be okay.
Right, because you're always playing queen takes queen with check if any discoveries. And right. What about just a rook move here?
Well, any rook move would leave me probably in a decent position if I just...
No, let's go to d5. Let's play an aggressive move like rook d5.
Well,
or even rook...
Rook d5 might be possible. I'm worried a little bit about some kind of forks on f6, but I think there's nothing immediate because this bishop's always going to be hanging.
Crazy position. Let's see what Kasparov played in the game.
He actually take on f1, which is what I liked a little bit more. It keeps this ideas of bishop f7 check a little stronger. So I don't think short can really take on e5. This looks just a little too dangerous.
Totally dangerous. But he's up in exchange right now. He doesn't have to completely regain material. And
exactly.
Nothing in his position is exactly under threat. Well, maybe bishop takes e8 and e takes...
I think bishop takes e8 is
on f6.
Right, this is a very big threat, actually. You take on e8, you take on f6. I'm going to be threatening checkmate on g7.
But let's follow this idea. Yeah, let's say black. I can't even make a waste move for black. I'd be irresponsible to make a waste move for black right here.
It's so tense, right?
But I'm thinking that like if you take on e8, I could also take on c3 as a counter to that.
Right.
Which looks risky as ever.
Right. So the idea is like if you play something like rook c8, which doesn't make any sense, but just wasting a move. Bishop e8, you want to play the move queen takes c3 again with this idea of regaining the queen after knight e2 check. Crazy lines already, very tactical position.
But he can take on. No, he can't take on f6 because of knight e2. So we have a real threat. Maybe bishop back to h5, guarding against the e2 square, and then attacking the queen once more, and also threatening to take on f6.
Right, the queen would be hanging. E takes f6 is a possibility. It seems unpleasant for black. You can still play something along the lines of queen c7, so that when I take on f6, you trade. But even then, after f7 check, I would take white any day.
This
This looks really
This
bad.
looks unpleasant, although at the same time, G6 might land when the king is on F8,
Right, you
right?
don't wanna
So let's
play.
follow that line, king F8
You
takes.
never
and
really
now
want to play G6
you allow
because
bishop
it's
H6
bishop
check.
H6.
Ooh,
Right.
Lots of lines to analyze, and Short's time is starting to tick down. 9:38 and counting after rook takes F1. Garry Kasparov engaging in his normal, aggressive, sacrificial style, imposing his will on the position, as we know he is wont to do, and Short feeling the pressure at this moment. So many lines to calculate to try to get out of this. What does he do here to be practical? I mean, he can't just let Kasparov attack him like mad. You could easily blunder. You could easily hang a loss of a piece or of a queen or of mate. This is a crazy position.
Yeah, and it's one that's very unpleasant from a practical point of view. Even if there is some way for black to be okay, to not really suffer an attack, it doesn't seem like it's obvious. It requires a lot of calculation, whereas white's moves just come very obvious. You're threatening things, you're attacking, you're taking. Whereas black, I mean, here, even this move, it's not clear what to do. We found a couple of moves that just lose outright, and some of the moves that do defend look a little awkward. So it begs the question here, what is exactly Short going to do?
He's having problems. And, you know, the engines, we're not using engines for this match, but the engines might come up with a solution and say, well, it's easy. Black just goes like this, like this, like this. But a human grandmaster looking at the chaos on the board right now, the imbalance in material, White has an exchange. White is at an exchange deficit, but he has a pawn for it. Bishops are in weird squares, no tactics for black that are evident, plus his knight on e8. And from a practical standpoint, it is much, much harder for sure to play black. And there's just no obvious moves, particularly with his knight sitting on e8. That knight on d4 is supposed to be an anchor piece, but it's not proving to be anything at all now. It's like paper tiger.
Yeah, this human grandmaster right here, I would hate black's position at the moment. It's so difficult to play. And I had mentioned earlier, this knight on d4 is really far away from the king side. You know, you cannot bring it back so easily. Knight e6 doesn't really help you. So what do you do with this knight? It's more of a target at the moment than it is an asset, even though it has apparently a very nice position.
And when you're up in exchange, you want to prove your exchange. So you'd love to have a rook sitting in the game. If the rook were already on c8, maybe you'd feel a lot more comfortable, but the rook is sitting on a8. So in effect, you're almost down this piece. The knight on c3 and the rook on a8 match each other almost, and it's really about the other pieces. And when you look at the other pieces, it's all white. It's all white with all the more active pieces.
And out of all the immediate tactical threats, you still have to remember that strategically there's going to be the idea of putting a knight on d5. And then what are you going to do? Sacrifice the exchange? Then you just have a bad position for nothing. The knight coming to d5 is also, among all the things that we've talked about, a very, very unpleasant thing. If by some miracle, after rook a c8, you know, this ideas of queen takes c3 work, and I don't think they do, then knight d5 immediately.
It's a
knight
d5 is the move we're looking at, and Short's time is ticking down rapidly now. He has to make a move soon, and with only 6 minutes and 40 seconds on his clock, and what looks like, from a practical standpoint, a terrible position. I mean, he only has one good piece. The more you look at it, the more you're unimpressed by black's pieces. He has one really good piece, that knight on d4, which can be traded at any point, but he can't even really do anything with it. So what to do to...
When your best piece is a target,
it's not a good sign.
Not a good sign.
It's not a good sign. And Kasparov now extremely relaxed in this position, although he knows he doesn't want to throw anything away as he's trying to scope the position for black's defenses, which are just not forthcoming. And it seems as though Short has, in fact, made a move, and he has played king to h8.
It crossed my mind, and I was going to say it on air, and then I thought, I can't say such a move on air. Somebody's going to laugh at me. Come on. But, well, he didn't find anything better. It has a couple of points. First of all, this pawn on f6 is not pinned, at least, so I can maybe regain it with g7 takes f6. Also, after knight d5, knight e7 is not a double attack. So it does have a couple of ideas, but it seems like it's wasting a move. I don't know.
Something feels wrong.
Something feels wrong
something
about
feels
it.
Very wrong. I mean, at minimum, bishop f7 is playable.
Well,
No,
bishop f7 actually, I
Oh
think.
no, we're back to the e2 problem.
Right. If I go bishop f7, then after queen takes c3, I still have this kind of issue
Absolutely.
on e2. And of course, the simplification of the queens might land me on a lost position because I need my initiative to prove that the exchange is not just an extra exchange.
And what about bishop takes on e8 instead of this move.
Okay, we can definitely take a
Let's
look at
take
that.
a look at that. Just again, whether or not bishop takes e8, can he still, because now you can't capture with the rook because the d4 knight is hanging. If you capture with the queen, then he can take on f6 twice, and that looks, I'm not sure it's totally promising there, but
Here, if I take on f6, you can maybe take back.
no, I mean, if you take with the rook, I can let bishop takes d4.
Oh, that's correct. So,
Yeah,
you want to take with the queen.
So queen takes, and now take on f6. Is this what white wants? Because after a capture, rook can take. I'm not sure that's the best move necessarily, but
This looks pretty strong.
this
If
this is two pawns.
This doesn't even matter if it's the strongest. It's pretty strong.
Looks practically very different. So what does he do? So what does he do after bishop takes e8? Does he have to play queen takes on c3? And does that work?
It's an important question if it works or not. This might be what Gary's calculating at the moment. I don't immediately see anything wrong with it. I mean, if I go back to h5, just to prevent knight e2, and I go back with my queen, maybe simply queen c2. No, queen c6 looks most logical. And then I take, you can maybe take back. I don't know. If there's a nothing immediate, I think this might be black's best idea.
This is survivable. This doesn't look like
This
death.
doesn't look so bad, right?
I mean, it's not exactly what you want out of life, but he could always play queen f2 and maybe win the f6 pawn and hope for something there. But if that's the worst thing that happens to black, I wouldn't mind. It feels like maybe there's something more concrete that could...
Well, I was thinking about, you know, Garry Kasparov was always a person that was known that before his brilliant attacks, he just made his king a little safer. And if
Good
my
point.
opponent just played king h8, I wonder how slow and bad this move is. Just putting the king on h1 to get rid of this queen takes c3 ideas, to get rid of the checks and some variations.
Very interesting move.
It's possibly not so bad if there's nothing else that's immediate, but of course I might consider knight d5 immediately if it does work.
I'm liking king h1, but Kasparov taking a long time trying to decide what move he's going to play, and look at his clock now ticking down. This is one of the problems with rapid. You start getting into some interesting position, you feel good, you feel great about what your attacking chances are, and all of a sudden, in order to make a decision, you look over at your clock and you say, uh-oh, I was thinking for 4 minutes, really? That's what's been going on? He's now lost in the variations. He is now less than a minute lead on the clock, and time ticking down with no concrete solution forthcoming.
Right, he's trying to force the position at the moment. If for some reason he's able to find something immediate, he's going to go for it. But if not, I mean, improving his position won't hurt him. Putting a knight on d5, putting a king on h1.
With knight d5, can rook takes on d5 be played? Is that a reasonable alternative here?
It might be reasonable, but you know, this is a free advantage, and if it's a free advantage, why not play it?
But why is it an advantage? It's even material.
You have the
mean,
pair of
the pair of
bishops.
bishops definitely.
No threats, the knight on e8 still under control. I would say this is really, really good for white still.
He did play knight to d5, and rook takes d5 has happened, pawn takes, and now queen takes, and we see this position, another transformation as these legends go at each other, one sacrifice being followed by the next. Rook takes on d5, pawn takes, queen takes, and now Kasparov in thought. It doesn't look like a hard position for him anymore. As you said, he has the two bishops, but how will he press home any advantage here? He cannot take on e8 just yet. And look at Kasparov now, almost gesticulating to himself in this moment, fixing his tie, loosening his tie a little bit.
I think he's happy with the way the game has gone. He has a pair of bishops. He still has some kind of an initiative. Black's not threatening on e5 because of the back rank checkmates. So, you know, even Black's next move isn't going to be something too exciting. Kasparov's trying to find a way to use the fact that Black's underdeveloped and that he has some real threats to create something in this move. But we're going to see if he's able to actually come up with anything. I was thinking of the move queen f4, since you cannot take on e5.
May I interrupt? For the first time in the game in a while, Kasparov is now under short on the clock. He is now at 6 minutes and 9 seconds, and I think Short is aware of that. That was an important moment for him. So practical matters will begin to feature itself here because Kasparov has a little bit of rust that he has to shake off, and Nigel has been playing a lot of chess. He's had to fight off some difficult positions, and he knows that time is a factor. And Kasparov, now just glancing at the clock there, as you can tell, he's got to be thinking about, what do I do? Now his time at 5 minutes, actually it was even less, at 5 minutes and 26 seconds. So let's pay attention to this clock as it begins to tick down, and we know under 5 minutes anything could happen.
Right, he hasn't gained as much advantage to just be able to make it up if he's very low on the clock. So he really needs to play something. So he played something very similar to what I was thinking, the move Queen F2, but the idea is that now knight E6 would not be a tempo against a potential queen on F4, and still the pawn on E5 is untakeable, I'm assuming because of the back rank threats. Let's just take a quick look. If I take on E5, I'm assuming that there's something that wins here somehow.
Well, it's not absolutely clear. Let's try to analyze this one
Like
through.
Queen F8 check, Queen G8 of course, forced move. I think that, well, there must be some way of gaining an advantage, but I'm not entirely sure what it is at the moment.
Because trading queens doesn't seem to work. The knight is prepared to jump into the game as well. Could you dominate that knight? Let's go back to that position. No, it doesn't look like you can. I was thinking maybe Queen E7 was an idea.
The problem with Queen E7...
And he has taken on E5. He's daring him to prove that he has a victory here. Nigel does not see a win. And Kasparov is now, the line is sitting in front of him.
Well,
does he have a win?
What is wrong with Queen E7, actually?
I don't know. I thought maybe knight C6, but now I see queen takes on B7.
Right, knight C6, queen takes B7
very strong.
looks devastating. And I was thinking knight F6, but I just found this idea, rook takes F6, pawn takes F6, and bishop H6, if I am not missing anything.
Wow, that is an interesting line. Now the threat of queen takes F6 looks impossible to deal with. Only knight F5 or something ridiculous would be the only way, allowing the F6 pawn to drop. But maybe he can survive that position?
Wow, that's difficult to believe, but if he has nothing better, he'll have to go for it.
Or what other move could he play after bishop H6?
No, I agree. I'm just trying to think if there's another move here. But I don't quite see one, because, I mean, rook F8 is coming. The knight on E8 is dominated. It can only go to F6.
That's right.
So it would have to come down to this resource. If it works, he might survive for just a little bit. So we're going to look at this line again.
This is the key line, it looks like.
Takes, bishop H6. Now, knight F5 looks forced in my book.
Something to deal with queen takes F6. Nothing can defend the F6 square properly. So that, and now this position with knight back to G7. It looks like a joke a little bit, but then again, you're not up anything serious. Matter of fact, white's down material here.
White's down an exchange, and even though he can take back on E5, it's still an exchange.
It's an exchange, and not much that bishop on H5 is going to do here to make the position much worse. I think that black is fine in this line. Let's go back a little bit, see if we can find something for Kasparov.
I think fine is a little overstatement, but he's surviving.
He's not dead. He's not dead for sure, and he's fighting in that line. He's looking for fighting moves. So let's go back even further. Is there something even before queen F8 check? I don't see any deflections that start this. Bishop F7 doesn't...
Bishop F7 is that after I play something along the lines of queen D6, I don't see a good discover attack with the bishop.
No, that's not going to work. That's
Funny
not going to work.
Bishop D5, I can just probably take it, so that wouldn't help me.
All right, so let's go back. Let's go back quickly to this position. So queen F8 check looks like the only move to think about here.
Yeah, I don't see anything else, actually.
All right, so let's go down this line. Queen F8 check and queen to G8. And Kasparov down to 2 minutes and 56 seconds, still looking for a winning blow, a knockout blow. And now he's shaking his head. It is clear to him, at least for the moment, that he has nothing obvious, nothing concrete. We're having trouble finding a move. So is this legend. There is no vicious blow that we can see. Where to put the white queen that makes any sense at all.
His spider senses are tingling. He knows that there must be something, but I can't quite see it. It's so close. You want to make this bishop on H6 move work. It looked so pretty, but somehow this miraculous knight F5, knight G7.
And he has played queen F8 check and queen G8 forced. We're anticipating queen to E7.
He could also take on G8 and just go for some kind of endgame, but I just don't think it's that advantageous. I mean, you can even go knight D6 in this position, so...
He's at the moment, black is up a pawn.
Right,
At the
he is
moment.
up a
I mean,
pawn at the
that's
moment.
something to consider. And equality is very close. Pawn structure virtually symmetrical, except for that extra pawn on e5. So Kasparov now with his time ticking down. We should take a look at the actual clock times on the table so that we see exactly where he stands, because Kasparov is feeling the pressure of the clock, and he has only actually, this is what I was concerned about, that he actually has less time, and he's found the same two moves we suggested with 151 left, and we're seeing knight f6 is on the board. Nigel playing instantly, putting the pressure on Kasparov.
And we're going for this line. Rook takes f6,
And rook
pawn
takes f6 is now on the board.
I'm going to assume bishop h6. Yeah, this is exactly what we predicted, and we thought knight f5 is the only way of surviving. I think I'm still going to go with that.
I'm befuddled, though, and I'm noticing this for the first time. I did not see a delay happen on the last move, or on the last couple of moves.
It does say delay on the screen.
It says delay, but I didn't see any delay. It seems like Nigel's time instantly started ticking down.
I'm also a little confused. Wasn't Kasparov under 145?
He is.
How's he up to 151?
He is at one. So now let's just take a look. Kasparov has now captured, and now knight back to g7.
Oh, I see. They're using the DGT delay, which means that the clock does start counting down for some reason.
Oh, and then it comes back
Then
up.
it comes back
and
up
then it
too.
comes
Yeah,
back
it comes
up. That's
back
the
up.
Bronstein
Right.
way of doing it. Okay,
Something like that.
All
right.
right. So in a sense it's a delay, but in fact it's kind of a weird increment. I hate this particular time control. In particular, like this one is like
I agree
weird
with
as weird.
you 100%.
If increments were a problem, but if I have a problem with increments, but to have a delay increment, that's bizarre. But at any rate, Kasparov is way down on the clock at 151. He's played queen takes on e5. He is down in exchange, but he has a pawn for it. The knight on g7 is simply stone cold, never going to move. The king in the corner. I don't think white objectively is worse in this position and should.
Not worse. I mean, he can only be better.
He can only be better.
But the question is, how much
But
better
how?
is he?
And there
Right.
comes that rook into the game.
It had to come back. The problem is that the rook itself is not going to do much. If you cannot coordinate it with the queen, I mean, I can really dominate it. These bishops, even though they're all the way on the h file, they dominate a lot of the c squares.
And look at this last move, bishop to f3,
Right.
attacking the pawn on b7 and preparing to go to the d5 square.
Very natural. Both bishop on d5, both bishop d5 and bishop e4 look like really good squares for the bishop.
But he has released the king, and take a look now. The queen has now come out to the d5 to the f7 square. Now worried about the bishop on d5, and it can even go to g6 in a moment to challenge that bishop. Of course, Kasparov can pick off the pawns on the queen side, it seems, by just trading down on g7. But is that good for him?
No, he
And he's
doesn't
playing
want to go
h3.
into this endgame. He's just playing h3 because he realizes that Short's queen, even though it was given a little bit of leeway, it's not going to be that dangerous. I believe the move queen b7 is simply met, queen g6 simply met with bishop takes b7. I don't see a real... Wait, I cannot do this because of queen takes h6.
So b5 has been played. Nigel Short keeping the pressure on, saving his pawn. And honestly, I don't see what the edge is for white anymore. I mean, it seems as though he is down in exchange for a pawn, and his bishops are not that impressive anymore. The knight is bad on g7. I admit the king is weak, but does he have anything?
Definitely white's better. The question is how to rearrange the bishops to prove so. The point is that the king is permanently weak. It's not a temporary advantage. You made the king permanently weak. And I'm going to be able to reroute my bishops. And your knight...
Bishop e4 is serving your point.
Right. And I think that at some point, if I bring my bishop back to e3, d4, with correct timing, of course, I have to watch out for rook e8. That would be really powerful. That way I can put pressure down the diagonal. A1, h8 without the need of the queen being on e5. I think that this is still very unpleasant for black.
What about queen c7 here? Is that a move that is reasonable? Queen c7?
It's absolutely reasonable. The problem is, like, what exactly are you doing for your position? For example, if I play queen f6, did you really improve your position that much?
Yeah, I'm looking for some random checks on the c file.
Right.
Queen c5 check. Of course, the bishop on h6 has the c1 square well covered.
So
but if
after
we
king
could play,
h1.
if we could somehow get in there and mix things up, but it doesn't seem that easy. And he's played.
Right.
Wait a minute, rook to e8. Whoa. Bishop takes g7 was a tactical idea, but it did not work because of king to g8. Short playing very interestingly there, and Kasparov instantly backing up his piece
To d4.
to d4. His queen is now back on the d4 square. And again, what move does black play here? His clock also ticking down as well. Kasparov finding ways to keep the annoyance factor high. And in blitz, that's a big deal.
Right.
Queen now to e7 has been played, attacking the bishop on e4.
Right, the trick was very pretty. The bishop's not actually under attack
Actually
on
not
e4.
under attack, that is correct.
Right, it was a very pretty trick, but at the same time, did it really improve black's position? And this is what we're going to be asking ourselves consistently. Now, the point of the queen on e7 is that I cannot reroute my bishop to d2 and c3. I don't have the time to do that because the bishop would actually be under attack on e4 if I let go of the knight on g7. So
this is an important moment, though, because the bishop on e4 can't move, or doesn't seem like it can simply move because of queen e1 check and then queen e5 check. Let's take a look at that line.
Right.
The bishop.
If bishop c2, for example, queen e1 check, forcing my king to e5, h2, and then queen e5, and then I'm more than okay.
b4 has been played,
Absolutely.
keeping the position intact.
Maybe an idea of Zugzwang, actually, because we're mentioning this queen and rook coordination down the e file, and here Kasparov
queen
simply
e5, queen e5, and now queen to d7.
Right. This is consistently the problems of the position, right? You have to play around this knight on g7. It cannot really move.
And now, how to deal with this position? Could he play?
Rook e7.
Could he play
maybe?
queen? Rook to e7. Rook to e7 looks like. Yeah, it looks like it's possible. Rook to e7 seems possible. Bringing the rook back to e8 on the next move. If queen check, then you can always bring the rook back and takes on g7, then take with the king.
And that would be a draw in certain cases.
So that's one option. What about queen? No, he can't actually pick off anything. White has to keep the structure. White, and now queen a1 check has been played. Queen a1 check, and Kasparov hesitating for a moment, moving his king up to h2. And is this just a perpetual?
Well, I don't have to take it if I'm white. I can just play g3, and even though it's not the happiest move on earth because I give up the second rank, it would at least avoid the checks.
But here, I mean, it just seems like challenges for him. Queen.
Yeah, now
can he just move the queen to b2 check and?
Yeah, definitely I'm worried here because after queen b2 check, I mean bishop g2. It's
And
not
now
exactly what I wanted to play.
That bishop is
not,
tied down forever.
Right. This is not exactly what Kasparov was aiming for. It seems like Short has managed to kind of solidify his position. And we weren't even sure that this was completely necessary.
And rook takes on e4, allowing this exchange, and now it's a draw. He wants to prove the draw on the board.
Right.
They are drawing by perpetual.
By perpetual.
And wow, what a battle by these two players. Kasparov looking a bit disgusted that he did not manage to win. He didn't want to sit at the board much longer. An incredible fight, titanic battle, and Short really showed that he is in form, definitely in shape as he maneuvered. How many people would have dealt with Kasparov, the energy, the fierce attacking player that he is in that position? Short seemed to do it with style.
He did a great job surviving. It was practically uncomfortable. As we said, maybe not lost, maybe the computer can find something. And this guy, he played like a computer. We didn't find anything. He was so cold-blooded, allowing queen f8, allowing queen e7, putting the knight on g7, which looked ridiculous, but he survived. He managed, and he's alive. He draws the first game with the black pieces. I think he's very happy about the result. And Kasparov just cannot believe his attack did not break through.
I can't believe it in some ways, although looking at it, we were unable to find a solution. Well, these two have been friends for a long time. Many decades have passed, and we got a chance to sit down with them as they reflected on this relationship.
I think it's always an honor if I'm asked by Garry Kasparov to play him. So actually I'm not going to turn down the greatest player in chess history.
First time we played was in 1980, and actually the first time we met was in 1977, but we didn't play at this under-16 World Championship. Hard to imagine that both me and Nigel, we played under-16 Championship, World Championship.
He called me, I think it was maybe September last year. He mentioned the possibility of this match here in St. Louis, and well, basically I agreed immediately.
I mean, it feels a bit unusual because he's still playing professional chess 10 years ago, though I played a few exhibition matches. One of them actually also was Nigel. We played the blitz match in Belgium, And of course, we played so many games, you know.
The last time I played him, I lost 4.5, 3.5, and that's 4 years ago, and he hasn't played since then. Of course, playing him is hard, very hard at the best of times, but I feel that I'm in good form.
I was out of professional chess for so long, and when people they ask me at some other events whether I still play, my response is, you know, basically it's a question: what do you mean play? Because for me, playing chess means, you know, just being fully engaged. I mean, we know exactly how Nigel can play now, because I mean he does fairly well. He's still, you know, quite active, and he just recently won a tournament.
So I've actually had a whole series of good results, but this is not the same as playing Garry Kasparov. You know, beating someone in Yangon is doesn't quite compare.
It's quite difficult, you know, to prepare yourself for a match. Yes, it's a friendly match. It's not serious. It's a match of the legends, but still, you know, it's. To find yourself at the chess set, you know, being watched by a lot of people, not only here in St. Louis, but also worldwide, you know, it puts some pressure.
I feel, you know, my chess is okay, and I'm not too worried about it, to be honest. Yeah, in a sense, I don't have anything to lose, so it's quite easy for me. You know, people will just say, well, that's Kasparov.
If I can play well, I think I'm a favorite, but I'm not sure I can play as well as I did before. But I'm quite happy that Nigel is here, and we are not simply playing another match, but we're playing something which promotes the game of chess. This is something that brought us together a long time ago.
Quietly, I am hoping for an upset.
Well, quietly hoping for an upset. I think he's doing more than that now. That last game really showed that this guy is a practicing player, that he's sharp, that he is on his game, because that was really incredible defense under all that pressure.
What resourcefulness. I mean, this is the mark of such a strong player. Where they're in difficulties, they find their way out of it like by magic. And I can tell you, most grandmasters would have lost that position. They would have crumbled. It would have been very difficult to find good moves. And he drew one of the best attackers in the world.
Well, let's take a look at that result now. The rapid game has ended. The score is tied at a half each. They have 4 blitz games coming up, and those, if this game is anything like what we are expecting to see, those games should be a lot of fun. And Alejandro, we're going to have to get up on our high horse to really giddy up and stay with those blitz matches. We see there Michael Khodorkovsky, Kasparov's longtime friend and manager, confidant, and Kasparov preparing himself, thinking about the missed opportunity. Did he miss something? He's probably wondering, maybe he just played well and his opponent played well as well.
I don't think he believes that. I think he knows in his heart that he missed something, that he was better at some point. He's not sure where, but that something was there. Something, this intuition of the attacker, of the aggressor, trying to prove that there was some advantage with his bishops, with his sacrifice. And I still he's in disbelief. Like, how did this guy survive?
Well, we're going to get to see some real action coming up. A lot more chess coming your way, and we'll be back on the other side of a commercial break.
Hi, my name's Mike Wilmering. I'm the Director of Development for the Chess Club and Scholastic Center of St. Louis and the World Chess Hall of Fame. On Tuesday, May 5th, we need your support. We'd like to rally the voice of the international chess community to help us raise money for Give STL Day, a 24-hour period of giving in which nonprofits across the city try to raise money for their cause. Help the voice of the international chess community be heard. Please visit stlouischessclub.org and pledge your support. Thank you so much and have a great day.
I would still probably be playing well and winning for a few more years, but I needed just to look for other things in my life. So I did much more than I could have imagined earlier in the game of chess, and I wanted to think about life after chess. So I didn't want to get stuck with chess forever, because I knew there would be a moment when my contribution to the game would not be sufficient to justify me playing only chess. I have been very active in promoting the game, especially game in chess for education. I was busy in building Kasparov Chess Foundation network around the globe. And I'm very happy that here in St. Louis we have the first meeting of all foundations. So it's, again, to demonstrate the status of the St. Louis as the capital, as the chess capital, not only for the United States, but probably for the whole world now. I was deeply engaged in promoting democracy and human rights in Russia, which was slightly different from playing chess because there were no rules in that game and no clear definition of winning or losing. And I've been busy writing books and doing lectures on strategy, on decision making, on innovations, on man and machines. And I have a very full life now. Though I try to keep myself, if not in shape, but engaged by doing also regular sessions with young stars here in the United States as a part of the program. I'm still, running short on time, so there's too much to do and there's little time.
"2014 was a great year for chess. Chess24 brought you live interactive broadcasts from top tournaments. A play zone where you can take on opponents from all around the world 24/7. Interactive beginners courses, ensuring you pick up the basics fast while having fun. A tactics trainer to sharpen your chess by solving puzzles adapted to your level. Hundreds of interactive videos. Chess24 on mobiles and tablets. Most features are free, but limited for registered members. Chess24 is offering a special premium membership for just $9.99 per month or $99 per year. See you at chess24.com.
I began when I saw my father playing against my older brother, Martin, and I asked whether I could have a game, and my dad said no, and that I was too young. Thankfully, my mum intervened on my behalf and said he should give me a game. Within a few months I was beating him. And actually, my chess didn't really develop very much because we didn't know anything about the chess world. The key thing came in 1972 with the Fischer-Spassky match in Reykjavik. So I was 7 years old, and there was just a massive explosion of coverage of chess. Malcolm Gladwell, in his book Outliers, he starts to identify some of the things which go into success. I was just fortunate to be born at the right time. I would never have become a chess player without the Fischer-Spassky match in 1972. And had I been, let's say, 10 years old, rather than 7 years old at that time, I would have missed out on some critical years in my development. It's a lot of fun. That's basically why I do it. I mean, I've spent my entire life trying to avoid working, and I've succeeded. With 50 years so far, that I do something that I still really love.
And we are back with the battle of the legends. We see Nigel short there after an amazing defense that he managed to concoct against Garry Kasparov. Kasparov's raging attack, or what looked like a raging attack at any rate, and now he's trying to get himself in the mindset to get out of that 25-minute game and get into blitz. We are back. I'm Maurice Ashley here with Grandmaster Alejandro Ramirez. Tell me, that game was so wild, but you seem to have found an improvement or was looking at it afterwards.
Well,
what do you think?
I was just looking at the game on our commercial break because it was fascinating to me, and it was very high level considering the speed, how quickly everything went, and the difficulty of finding moves in this position. And it seems like the move that really gave back the game was in this position, knight to d5, which we considered to at least be very pleasant.
Very natural move. Very natural
move. It seems like the move queen h4 might have been better.
Unnatural move by a long way.
I think so, but then you realize that the move has two important purposes. The first, it removes all these queen c3 ideas we were looking at, and second, this bishop g6. Suddenly, not such an easy move to parry, since of course f takes e5 is still impossible because of the back rank checkmate. It's not exactly a very pleasant position for black. It seems very close to losing. There's still a couple of defensive resources here, so it's not like it's completely lost, and white would still have to continue a precise attack. But at the same time, this would have been much more difficult to deal with than the continuation after the game. Knight d5 takes, queen takes d5, and after the queen f2 move, the very cold-blooded and very exact f takes e5.
So that move, queen h4, maybe if Kasparov had 10 minutes on the clock to look at all the candidate moves. What's the attacking move? What's the move that gets my knight out of trouble? We see him there marching back and forth, trying to get himself back into the mindset of how do I win this game or this match, these next 4 games, not just thinking about the games that have just passed.
And we have one of the
game that has just passed.
We have one of the most difficult transformations in chess mindset, and that is the time control switch. When players switch from one time control to the other, you can see the quality of the games drastically diminish because you're used to doing one thing and then suddenly you're doing the other. And it's very difficult to cope with this. That's the reason when you see the World Cup or when you see the World Women's Chess Championship, you see maybe some decent games on the beginning rounds in the standard time control, and then like complete blunders in the rapid, and then complete blunders in the blitz. And then the next classical, it also seems like there's a lot of blunders. And it's the reason is that you can't adjust. You're doing something, you're doing the other, you don't really know how much time to spend, you can't really focus. It's like your muscle memory is not working correctly, and it's just very difficult to adjust. So at the moment, we're going to see how Kasparov and Short prepare themselves mentally to go from a rapid game to a very quick blitz game with no increment.
Well, let's take a look at that format again. They have already finished their 25-minute battle. The rapid game has completed, but now we go to the blitz games. This is the stuff I grew up playing in the parks in Brooklyn. 5-minute chess, but this time with a 3-second delay. Again, there will not be adding time, or I guess we did see it sort of add incrementally, so it's kind of a Bronstein delay, I think it's called, but it's still 5 minutes. That's not a lot of time. We're going to see the first 10, 15 moves come out in a clip, just like that. And at the moment, we see the standings with the one rapid game, a draw, and the points are to be had in the blitz games. And blitz, Alejandro, can take a different turn. Momentum matters a lot in blitz. You can lose one game and suddenly lose 4 in a row because of the momentum shift. So it's very important that you come out strong in blitz, especially with a short match. For today anyway, 4 games only to be played.
Right, for a blitz setting, it's a very short match. We're talking about only 6 blitz games in total.
Sorry, there are eight
blitz games in total. And it's not that many. So as you said, a couple of losses, and then suddenly, how do you come back?
You feel like you're in a giant hole.
Exactly. So we're going to have to see how they adjust for this game. Black is going to be played by the legend, Garry Kasparov. And, well, is he going to try to hold down Short, who's playing the white pieces, or will he go extremely aggressively and try to win from the beginning?
Well, again, we see he gets immediately into attack mode. One thing we'd always talk about in the classical matches, Kasparov would be someone who was wont to keeping his jacket on, keeping the watch on until it was time to get down to business somewhere in the middle of the game, especially if he was confused. If he was not confused, the jacket would not come off and the watch would not come off. I'll tell you that much. the jacket almost never comes off, as a matter of fact, because usually he's just beating on you. But in this case, he knows he's at 5 minutes already. He doesn't want any impediments, so both of those come off, and the clock has been pressed, and they have begun this game. And the move D4, it looks like. C4 actually has been played. C4, G6 quickly, and Kasparov gaining the 3 seconds, as we see there. It's called a delay, but in fact, he's getting 3 seconds once he moves. So the clock ticks down, and then he gains the 3 seconds. And Short, uncharacteristically, is thinking after the first move.
Well, there's a lot of choices here. He's not exactly calculating. He's simply trying to decide which setup do I want to play. They're going to go for this kind of non-committal English in which, Black now commits into the symmetrical English. A very common idea. We've seen this played, thousands and thousands of times. Black has several options. Recently, this plan with D6 and E5 has become extremely popular.
Very solid way of playing.
Extremely solid. It's one of my favorite ways of playing the symmetrical English as Black, so we're going to see if that happens. But there's other choices, of course. You can go symmetrical with Knight F6 at some point. You can play E6 and D5. There are so many choices here. And Short played this move D3.
But I have to say, all that time he spent, too, it is a blitz game, and we were expecting to see the first 5 moves be blitzed out. After all, he's played E6 instead of your plan of D6, E5 after this move D3. But he's spending, it seems, quite a bit of time on every single move here.
Yeah, I think he should have made a note in his score sheet that this is a blitz game. Maybe it would have helped him.
Wow, said tongue-in-cheek. Well, the knight has gone H3 to F4. There'll be no note-taking at this table. And 444 for Kasparov. He's already ahead, quite a bit of time on the clock. It seems simple enough for him to just castle. And like you said, maybe they're getting into blitz mode just after coming from those rapid games where you had the opportunity to think for a minute, 2 minutes. You can't do that here. You have to get into automatic mode. You watch one of the best players in the world. Number 2, I believe, on the list is Hikaru Nakamura. This guy doesn't spend more than 4 seconds on any move. I mean, he's just like clip, clip, clip.
Of course not. But I really like what Short's doing, even though it took him a little bit of time. It's a very clever setup where you first play D3 and you wait for Black to decide how he's going to develop. And this idea of playing Knight H3, F4 is specifically good against the setup with E6, Knight G7, because White controls D5. Therefore, D5 is impossible to be played. And now this idea, H4, you put some pressure on the king side. Kasparov responds with a very typical idea of H6, so that H5 can be met with G5, closing down on the king side. And the problem here for Black is that he doesn't get D5 in. So it's not as comfortable as some other options when the white knight doesn't go to F4.
Well, we just saw the move Queen D2 and B5.
Yeah, these are all common ideas. The point here is that White wanted to play B3, and Kasparov's not going to let him. He sacrifices a pawn in order to open up the queen side and to allow himself to play the very important move D5 in order to coordinate all of his pieces. So it goes a little bit on the spirit of the Benko gambit, but of course it doesn't exactly resemble it because of the pawn structure. But the idea is the same. You put a lot of pieces on the queen side, you attack that sector of the board, and since you are also controlling the center with your pawn on D5, you kind of ask Short, what's your plan?
Well, Short is answered with a plan E4 himself, looking to blast open the position. And this game has gotten rich all of a sudden. Kasparov, he like perked up when he saw the move E4 and land on the board. He's like, I sacrificed a moment ago. I'm not expecting any rich responses like this one. That's a move. Is it good, though?
It's interesting. He wants to force Kasparov to commit in the center. He doesn't want to just let this advantage of structure in the center go without any compensation. He wants to rip it apart. E4 makes sense. Is it a good move? It's not so easy to say. There are some problems with, for example, bishop a6. The knight doesn't have a lot of retreat squares. Oh, he did play bishop a6. Attacking
that square and taking on d5, now attacking the knight on c6 himself. And Kasparov has taken on b5, allowing a pawn on c6, but albeit temporary, as it's been captured as well. Black is still down a pawn for the moment, but he's restraining White's position. His bishop on g7 looks excellent.
And White's going to lose his best piece, which is the bishop on g2. His structure is not happy. He has a weakness on d3. He has a lot of problems developing his queen side. So yes, he's up a pawn at the moment. but finding moves is not going to be easy. And I spoke with a lot of people about blitz chess, and sometimes it doesn't matter what the position on the board is. It matters who has the initiative. And in this case, it does feel like it's black. I would be much more comfortable finding moves for black in this position than for white, even though white is up a pawn at the moment.
But look at this last move, queen to c2, attacking the pawn on c5. And now e5 has been played, trying to displace that knight. If Short can get his bishop to the e3 square, he might be happy. And this e5 move has blocked the diagonal of his own bishop as well. Seems like a very interesting idea to push this pawn to e5.
I think he wants to take control over the d5 square, maybe even land the queen there after trading off the bishops. So he's going for a lot of space advantage. You have to realize that a2 is also hanging in a lot of variations. For example, after e5, knight e2.
Bishop takes on c6, knight takes c6.
Right, I think that was kind of forced because of the forks on d5 after the trade of bishops on g2.
Knight back to e2 has been played, guarding the entry and incursion on d4, and now Kasparov up a pawn, but needing to maybe
down a pawn.
I mean down a pawn, excuse me, maybe to prove a little bit here, because white's position is very solid. His d pawn though quite weak. It looks like
solid but not developed. I'm a little worried about, you know, for example, knight b4. I think you have to take on c5, and then knight takes d3, followed by an idea like e4. I just don't believe black can be worse. There's so much pressure on the queen side. White's so underdeveloped. I'm not saying he's necessarily that much better.
Okay, rook to c8 followed by bishop to d2 instantly, and they're both feeling the pressure off the clock. And that rook leaving the a file, I'm not sure it was the best decision by Kasparov, and the bishop out to d2, and now his queen is hovering. He's played the move queen to d7, positional type move.
Right, you're attacking some of the light squares on the king side, and you never know when a queen can go to h3 and suddenly cause a lot of harm.
Rook a d1 has been played.
Rook a d1, a little passive. He just wants to control the d3 square, make sure that nothing's hanging.
And f5, f5, talk about an aggressive move in this position. That doesn't look like he was looking to build up on the queen side in any way. This is just go attack him. f4 maybe coming next with f3 and queen h3.
The plan is not subtle. It's just hard to parry.
Well,
so
now
we're gonna have
f4
to see.
in reply. Short not wanting his piece to come under attack, and king to e7, h7, and then bishop to c3. And it looks, at least for the moment, white has dealt with most of the issues, although knight to d4 could be played here.
Right, knight d4, I would assume that I don't have to actually take this knight, but I don't like leaving it either.
And Kasparov at 154 and counting, and he has played
knight
d4 and queen d2 in response, leaving the knight on that square. Short with a huge edge on the clock, over 30 seconds, and now e takes on f4 by
That's an interesting
Kasparov.
decision. Interesting decision to take, because it allows me to play, for example, knight takes f4 at the moment. It also allows me to take with the rook. It gives white a couple of more options than I would have liked to do. And then, yeah, he did take with the rook. Suddenly, the knight on d4 doesn't feel as comfortable as it would in other lines. He has to make sure that the pawns on the queen side don't just become two free passed pawns. So Kasparov has to prove something.
And bishop takes on d4, c takes d4. That bishop, not exactly a picture, painting a pretty picture on the square g7.
I don't know. I'm going to get it to e3 faster than you think I am.
Well, we want to see that, but the e3 square is under attack at the moment. There is the possibility of rook to e3 at any moment, and doubling on the e-file as well.
Well, I was thinking about the move h5, bishop h6, bishop comes to e3. Very uncomfortable. The king will not be very happy about that.
Well, the rooks have doubled on the f-file, doubling down on that square. I'm not sure what the purpose there is, and now the rook has landed on e3. And he will be able to double rooks himself on the e-file. Where's the knight going to go?
I'm not entirely sure what the point of doubling... Oh, there's the point, I guess, of doubling the rooks on the f-file is to challenge the e3 square.
And now both pair of rooks doubled, and Kasparov ahead on the clock, 142 to 131. They're in a critical moment, and now knight to f4 has been played as the clocks tick down. Now queen to b7, attacking the rook on f3 and telling him to get off that square. What will he do? King g2 doesn't look great. Queen to g2. And now queen a6 hitting the a pawn, putting some pressure on the d pawn. b3 protecting the pawn, and 140 for Kasparov, 125 for Nigel.
There's a lot of pressure at the moment, but White's position is holding. There are no more real threats to make immediately. So Kasparov needs to build up his position. And I actually am not a huge fan of having put the queen on a6. So I don't know. I feel like the idea of playing h5 and bishop h6 before was a little stronger.
Well, White has not played h5. Look at that. h5 is in the position challenging Kasparov's king side.
Yeah, why not? At the moment, it seems very logical to counterattack as it is.
And what's this about? Bishop takes on f4. It looks like Short should be able to take on g6 with check.
He does.
The king,
No,
the
but you take with
queen
the
can
queen.
capture. And now pawn takes, and now the offer of a queen trade. This position looks like no way in the world White loses it. Oh, wait a minute. Now, unless a rook can appear on the g file.
Right, there's queen h5 at the moment. It's still dangerous for both sides. Both kings a little bit exposed. I would say White's in a little bit more of danger. Rook g8 is coming. You don't want to take on e3 because I take with the pawn, and then the pawn becomes very dangerous.
Well,
It
what's your
just
next
adds to the
move?
attack.
What's your next move here?
Well, let's see.
Maybe queen h3 is playable? No, queen h3 loses a rook, actually. Queen takes queen.
Right, you
What do
cannot
you
do that.
do? Rook g8 is a huge threat. With 40 seconds left and ticking, Short is trying to figure out what to do about this move. Rook to g8.
Yeah, this queen h5 move, very strong. It puts pressure on the rook on f3, which doesn't allow me a lot of simple ways.
And he
has to
decided
take,
he had to
take.
capture. And the threat is still there. Now queen to
Queen
h2. Rook to g8 is on the board. King
Right.
to h1. And now e2, sacrificing his queen.
That's it.
Kasparov with a
Nice
amazing
attack.
finish, showing his style, his skill, an amazing attacking game, down upon all that time. But what a beautiful finish by Kasparov. Let's take a look at the analysis. He's looking jubilant there indeed after that victory. Just a beautiful game.
Well, it's funny because Short opened the g file. He thought he was going to take advantage of the g file. He played h5, h takes g6, but he didn't have to. Had he actually just, I think, taken maybe on f4 at this point with maybe the rook, he wouldn't have been doing so badly. I guess he was worried about queen
worried
takes
about
e3.
his pawn
Maybe there's
on that
actually some
square.
problems already, because once he played h5, he had to reckon with the possibility that black would use the g file for himself. I really like this h5 move when he played it, but the more I look at it, the more I'm realizing, wait a second, black's the one that's using the g file.
Well, it was that queen on a6 that actually did it, because the queen was able to come over
Right.
to that side. Let's take a look at the finish so that the fans can see why he resigned in this position. Queen takes g6, fantastic
And the queen
move.
h5 maybe just winning.
Looks winning. I could not find a defense there.
And definitely not in a minute.
And
So,
after queen h2, rook check, king
E2.
over in e2.
And now there's no way of defending the rook, because if you just move it away, the queen comes down to f3, checkmate on the next move. If you take my queen, I promote with devastating effects, and there's just nothing else to do.
Amazing and exciting game by Kasparov, showing his blitz skills. The next game should start in a few minutes, as it's starting at every 15 minutes. And Short, we see there getting ready. Well, the score is now Kasparov in the lead, 1.5 points after that victory, a scintillating victory with the black pieces. Short sitting at a 0.5 point, needing to seek revenge, and Short already has revenge on his mind. He knows he cannot go into a hole. The first person to score, it's almost like football, or what I would say soccer. We Americans say soccer. I was trying to honor you right there. Knowing you're from Costa Rica, you say football. But certainly soccer, a goal is big.
It's
And,
big.
and I'll even use hockey as an example. Yesterday I went to go watch the Blues play against the Wild. Unfortunately, St. Louis lost, unfortunately for the home city. But a goal is important in those sports. And in a short blitz match like this one score can weigh on your mind. You feel like you need to get it back. Now, of course, it's 8 games. He has to see it in total of this match. But one goal, one score, one win can start to put wind to your sails. And if Kasparov wins another game with the white pieces, Short is in a gigantic hole, feeling like he's just being almost crushed in the match.
It's setting the tempo. Here, Short needs to retaliate either this game or next game, but he cannot lose now. He needs to at least hold the draw, because if he loses, he finishes the day with a minus score, and then going into the next one,
Well,
it's not
this
going
is
to be...
still only the second game, so he could bounce back and win 2 in a row.
He would have to win 2 in a row.
But he would have to win 2 in a row.
Two in a row,
Not likely
wow. That's,
against Kasparov. That's a tall order, especially after you've been pummeled 2 games in a row by Kasparov. So we would expect him to come out maybe moving a little bit quicker this time in the opening. Remember, that did cost him in the beginning, all that thinking. You can't
I
do
do
that.
think that for a blitz game, they played a little slow.
Yes.
I mean, it's hard to criticize legends as such as they are, but it did feel a little bit slower considering the amount of moves they made. They were already getting into severe time pressure by the time the game ended. And I feel like had there been a little bit better defense by Short, Kasparov would have had to prove his position in a position where he just didn't have enough time.
Right, and they will probably get to that or acclimate themselves to the new time control very quickly. Surprising, Kasparov put his jacket on to take it right back off. I probably would have left it there, walked around, but there goes the jacket, and there goes the watch.
And here come the white pieces.
And here come the white pieces indeed. So Kasparov getting ready. Short certainly disappointed by the last game. The way Kasparov played was really in style. That looked like some vintage Kasparov in that game. Maybe not perfect play, but he played it with energy. He played it with confidence, sacked the pawn right out of the opening and said, let's just play. Let's just play.
Right.
That's amazing. I mean,
it was beautiful style.
This guy could still be top 10, I think, if he played regularly. If he had been playing all this time, I still think he's in the world's top 10.
He keeps himself sharp. That's what he says, and you can see it in his style. He's not afraid of taking risks. He's not afraid of playing strange moves. And speaking of strange moves, it seems like Short is coming out with a two-knight tango, I believe it's called.
Well, he did have d6 on the board, so maybe not quite, but it is an unusual setup. That knight on c6 coming out right out of the opening and trying to get Kasparov on his back foot already. Kasparov knows this is some preparation, but it can't be bad to develop your pieces. And now g6.
This looks like a funky perch, but it's weird with the knight on c6. The knight doesn't usually belong there because it's more flexible on d7, and it's a little bit easy to target on c6 with a move such as d5. Even the move d5 immediately is possible.
But opening success goes to Short already. I'm sorry. Well, you take a look at this. Already Kasparov thinking about what to do on move 5. I mean, 2 pawns up, 2 knights up, and move 5, he's thinking it's just too much to be giving a big time advantage in the opening all the time. And he's not going to get an edge here. I mean, make a couple of moves. And he's played d5, knight back to b8 quite quickly. And Kasparov's going to have to make some moves. So I guess the d5 decision was an important one he had to think about. And now they're making a couple of fast moves.
I always prefer playing d5 when I have the possibility of following it up with c4, since after all I'm gaining space on the queen side, I want to gain even more space. It feels like the time gained by Short justifies the time lost in tempi in development. So we're going to have to see this battle between the clock and the position. It feels like he should play a lot faster than he is at the moment.
All right, so we are seeing this move now. It looks like Short has castled and played bishop g4.
And bishop g4, which is a typical idea now that the dark squares are weakened. h3 played quickly, and of course the bishop has to come off the board to justify the bishop going to g4. And we have a lot of quick moves being played.
Yes, and Kasparov has played a5 as well, and a6 by Short, just dealing with that incursion or that upstart pawn on the a file going down to a5. And it looks as though we're back to this classic battle, the argument of the two knights, the two bishops versus the knights.
Right, but this one was actually a voluntary giveaway by Short based on the weakness of the dark squares that Kasparov has in his position. So he wants to play against this technically weak bishop on f3, which is unable to really participate in a lot of battles because of the pawn structure in the center.
And lots of interesting last 2 moves, bishop to e3, knight bd7, and bishop to d4. That's a fascinating concept here, answered by rook to e8, and now rook to e1 by Kasparov. What's the point of this bishop d4 maneuver?
I'm trying to figure it out. He's probably baiting some kind of c5 idea. Maybe he feels that c5 would just cripple black's pieces, but I'm not entirely sure why the bishop's on d4 at the moment.
Queen to c7 now has been played after those last couple of moves. Queen to c7, just finishing his development, and not easy for Kasparov to move the pawns forward to get a break. That makes a lot of sense. e5 is not on play right now. By trading off the light squared bishop, Kasparov no longer has the knight. He has a bishop, but his bishop can only guard light squares. So it's easy for black to guard those light squares. Right now in particular, that e5 square, it's easy for black to guard the dark squares, excuse me. That e5 square is the critical square that we're...
And it's so important for black to be able to hold down the advanced e5. If Kasparov manages to get it in for some reason, he's just going to rip apart the position. The bishops are going to become monstrous.
But look at this last move, knight to a4, and Short has whipped out the move e5 instantly in response, attacking the bishop and allowing a trade on the e6 square.
Absolutely
And Kasparov
natural.
has ignored it and played bishop to b6.
Yeah, he wants to use his space advantage. He's not going to really worry about the center as much. He just wants to focus on the queen side at the moment. He wants to prove that the weakness on b6 is quite real. However, after, for example, taking on b6, which was played, if I take with the knight and I just move the rook away, I'm going to assume to d8. I have the quick idea of knight d7, challenging the knight on b6. I don't think it's a big deal. And if you take with the pawn, it just becomes a weakness on b6. I don't think it really gives you
Taken
anything.
with the knight and rook to d8 instantly. And again, we see the value of trading off the light square bishop for a knight. And now we see the dark square bishop gone, and black is in control of the dark squares.
And a minute and a half advantage from what I can see.
Serious advantage on the clock. It looks like black is perfectly fine here. I mean,
Yeah, it comes as a really nice bounce back here for short. I still feel white's a little bit better, but it doesn't seem to be that much. I feel he can get out of trouble without that many issues.
Rook to e3 has been played. And if we take a look at the clock times, the actual clock times, we see right now they're hovering over the board intensely, and a big advantage on the clock, over 2 minutes, well, just a little under 2 minutes on the clock, and now knight to d7 challenging the knight, but Kasparov insisting on getting a hold of that b6 square, and that's an interesting maneuver because then he might be able to put more pressure on the b7 pawn by bringing another rook to the b file. So a very creative maneuver by Kasparov, bringing his rook up.
Now I'm wondering what happens on rook, knight takes b6, rook takes b6, and if I can take on d5. I'm wondering, because I think here Kasparov has to take with the queen, and then, well, there's this idea of taking on c2, which I don't think is immediately that great.
F5, talk about blowing up a position. F5 is now on the board. That seems bananas in this position.
To play
that
F5.
just seems like a wild decision.
It seems a little crazy. I can definitely say that. He wants that central pawn mass, but can he really do anything with it? I'm actually wondering if f5 has a threat.
There is no threat. That's my problem with it. It doesn't seem to be a threat with the move F5. It just seems as though
And Kasparov voluntarily takes on d7 in order to install his rook on the b6 square.
But also opening up lines soon. This F5 move looks like it will invite white to take on F5 at some point, and he has that long diagonal with his light square bishop.
It's a little suspicious, I agree. This F5 move looks very suspicious because it doesn't have a threat. It just gives options.
And in fact, after I was about to say queen d3, and you have no way of breaking through on that side. I mean,
and there's immediately the threat of pawn takes on c6, pawn takes on c6, queen takes a6. And
win a pawn. So c5 was played to stop that, but now rook posting up on b6, a great square for the rook, and it looks as though Kasparov is in complete control. How will black get any play here?
It's a little unpleasant, I have to admit that. But after rook b8, maybe here short can try to force Kasparov to prove his advantage. Maybe I expect a further rook lift with rook a3, rook b3, because short's idea would be to play a very quick bishop f6, bishop d8 in order to cover his weaknesses on the queen side. Now the thing about space advantage is that it allows you to swing pieces on both sides of the board much easier than your opponent. So here, because white has the space advantage, he can always think about taking on f5 and swinging his rooks to the king side in case that black becomes too solid on the queen side. There are options. It's obviously much easier to play with white, but it's not going to be easier if Kasparov falls under a minute and some.
Rook to f8. That's a strange looking move. Rook to f8. I'm not sure what this does. And b4 on the board. b4 ripping open the queen side and looking to bring his rook to the b1 square. Is this sound? I mean, this looks, if it's good, black could be in a lot of trouble, but it also gives black some opportunities. Here he took on b4, now rook over to b1. Rook.
He's going to recapture with the one rook, which allows his bind to continue. Of course, black's going to be fine if he gets in bishop f6, d8. I just don't think he can do it on time. So he's still in a little bit of problems. He has to defend this pawn on b7. It's a little awkward to do so. Also now the pawn on d6 can become a target, and there's always this ideas of c5 breaks. Despite the fact that short has the square c5, I don't really know if he can use it. He played the move rook c5.
Rook c5, excuse me, and now rook takes on b4 and rook takes on a5.
Risky.
Giving
He's
away
up
the b7 pawn. But where is his counterplays? The king going to be safe on h2? Is a bishop going to land on the f4 square and cause any problems? Queen b1 stopping any possible counterplay on the back rank, but the clocks must be a huge factor now, starting to play on both players' minds. After queen back to d8, there goes the b pawn, and both sides 154 for short, 113 for Kasparov, but the rooks have crashed through
This looks so
on the
unpleasant.
b file. How does Black
unpleasant.
play? Black has no play.
No
In
play.
fact, Black has to defend. Queen f6 has been played.
He's trying to create something out of nothing. He hopes f takes e4 as at some point a threat. There's the real idea of simply doubling up on the 7th file with rook a7, rook b7.
But Kasparov is under a minute now. Kasparov at 57 seconds, having to think about the possibilities here. And as you mentioned, maybe rook aside, but he's decided to guard the f2 square.
The idea is simple. If takes, I can take with the bishop.
And 139 for Black. Black with very little options here to what move to do. He doesn't have any real active play, and he's looking around for a move. He needs to waste a move. Rook a3, that's a good waste move. Also, eyeballing the bishop, actually.
He wants
That's
to
a threat.
sacrifice something. He knows that he's in tempo pressure. He needs to do something now before the rooks actually coordinate.
And that's an annoying piece, putting the rook on
Very
that square. The
very
potential
annoying.
of the sack. Suddenly Black gets counterplay, or at least pretend counterplay, with queen g5 check, and it looks as though he's getting some play. And Kasparov now down to 32 seconds. And he's
Wow,
played c5. What is that about? Breaking through with this move. But doesn't that allow the sacrifice to happen on f3? I mean, c5 is...
Well, I'm trying to figure out what the point is if I just take the pawn, and
Well,
that's exactly
and it has
what
been
Nigel
captured
Short's
with 32
asking.
seconds left for Kasparov. What is the main point? His d pawn doesn't seem to be going anywhere immediately. And can he play rook to b6?
He can play rook b6, but the problem would be queen g5 gains a tempo on the bishop on f3.
Absolutely. And also 16 seconds left on the clock. I'm not sure.
Can somebody tell Kasparov to move?
Kasparov's got to move. I mean, he's got to move. 10
Yes.
seconds, counting down. Only 8 seconds left. And he's finally played rook a2, getting 3 seconds back.
But he has 9 seconds?
He has 9 seconds total. 9 seconds. He'll get 3 seconds every time he moves, but he's shaking his head now. The counterplay by Short, bringing him back in the game, and he has taken on a2 and now moved this king off the line to h8. Only 7 seconds left for Kasparov. His time ticking down. He's got to make a move.
3,
Come on.
2,
2 seconds. 1 second. And he has run out of time. He is flagged. Kasparov has run out of time. Completely distracted.
Wow.
Amazing. Kasparov not being aware of the clock.
I did not see that coming.
That's insane.
He just was completely unaware. He was so focused on the position, and this is the kind of things that happen when you're rusty.
Exactly. The clock starts to play a factor. It doesn't matter how good your moves are, the clock becomes a real issue, and he was literally just unaware.
He was just unaware.
He had no idea how bad his time situation was, that he had to be blitzing out moves.
Exactly. At least when Robson gets into these situations, he knows he has 1 second. He's got it under control. I think Kasparov just had no idea he was under 10 seconds.
No, he did not look like a man who plays a lot of blitz or played enough blitz to know that there's pressure on. And Nigel just kept his chances alive and bounced back to even the score. A very important victory for him, and a bitter taste in Kasparov's mouth for losing this kind of game. Maybe
Especially
losing
that
is one that
position.
he was dominant. He was dominant.
He was a dominating position, and to be fair, he had let go of the game a little bit. It seemed like he had a very clear advantage at some point. He had some very real pressure, and we see the final position. To me, this is not so clear. A couple of rooks came off the board. Suddenly, pawn takes on e4 is a real issue. I don't know. This doesn't seem like it's clear at all. But 15 moves ago,
have time.
15 moves
Oh,
ago,
he was dominant.
He was
15 moves
dominant.
ago.
He had time. He had everything going for him.
The doubts might start to creep in. Well, let's take a look at the current standings after that second game. It is now tied. So, well, it's all to play for with 2 games left. Sure, it has to feel good. Both players, by the way, won with the black pieces in this so far with blitz. It kind of doesn't matter black or white in blitz. It just seems like it's all about the clock and how much.
And it was the clock this time. Nigel Short with an important moral victory. You don't want to lose 2 in a row.
Oh,
he,
no.
he had a very bad position, and the fact that he was able to win.
Incredible.
Nice
Incredible
relief.
comeback, and now Kasparov walking around. There go the 2 players passing each other there in the hallway of the club, and Kasparov has got to be thinking, what just went wrong? And let me get that out of my head and start to move faster.
Much faster.
Because
I had mentioned in the previous game, I felt Kasparov was playing too slow. There you go.
No,
he,
that was
he
that
was playing too
ridiculous.
slow.
That
Yeah,
was ridiculous.
Absolutely ridiculous.
For the former world champion, if we had seen him at his prime, you see him at his prime, that never happens.
No, of
that
course
just simply
not.
never happens.
Of
The guy
course
will just be blitzing out killer moves. But right now, having not played too much, though, that's a bit disturbing.
It's that
the
sense.
thing is,
You're playing rapid. He thought he had plenty of time. You have this sense, like this inner clock in you when you're playing blitz and rapid, that you know more or less how much time you've spent, and he just did not feel that he had spent that much time. He wasn't still looking at the clock to make sure, how many seconds do I have? Do I have to move now? Do I have to move now? He was just completely like, oh, let me look at my position, let me improve my rook, and then boom.
I mean, when the clock, when he flagged, he looked over
Like, really?
Wow.
Yeah.
It's like, dude, you got to get a grip. It's a very interesting match. But it's 2 games in, and we should see these players adjust even more as the games go on and see better chess. But Kasparov definitely not happy with himself and with the form of that last game. That game he won was really brilliant. I mean,
that's absolutely a brilliant attack, brilliant domination all over the board, and he was pretty much set up to do the same thing on the second blitz game, but there's the clock.
There's the clock. We saw the rooks in the first game really show their stuff, and again the rooks in this game about to show their stuff. And Short's pieces were all over the place. I mean, the rook on a5, the rook on f8, they were disconnected.
Yeah, there was no coordination whatsoever.
Somehow
but
he managed to put just enough pressure.
He's a resourceful player, and he knows that blitz isn't just about what's going on over the board.
And Kasparov looking out into the St. Louis sky. It's a cloudy day, Garry. That's not going to help your mood much. We'll see whether or not he can figure it out. And we want to see him play great chess. He was 28.51. Can you imagine? And those were pre-rating inflation days, if you will. I'm not saying that Magnus Carlsen's rating is not legit, but Garry used to dominate. When he went to tournaments back in the day, the question was, who's coming in second? It was not even. It's not even who's fighting for first. He would win tournament after tournament after tournament. 10 in a row, I believe, was one at one point. Where it was just clear he was far better than the players of that generation. A few of those players of that generation are still with us today, playing great chess. Vishwanathan Anand, he played in a World Championship match. Now in second place at the Gashimov Memorial.
Not only
still
second
playing
place,
fine
he's
chess.
number 2 in the live rankings.
That's
He
right.
actually surpassed Fabiano Caruana. But with his victory today over Shakhriyar Mamedyarov. So impressive that Anand can still play at this level. But at some point it was Anand and Kasparov, and that was it.
That's right. Those were the 2 best, and I'm sure Garry might look every once in a while and say, man, I can hang with these guys. Come on. Well, he's got his hands full right now against this guy who he played for a World Championship title back in 1993. He dominated that match 6-1, ran away with it, in fact. But now, as we said, in the exhibition matches, Short has been able to hold his own at the quicker time controls, and now B3 has been played. Short just completely erasing all preparation from Kasparov, and Kasparov needs to move quickly, and he has definitely done so. Knight f6 and G6.
G6.
What is
Interesting idea.
this one?
It allows the move E4 because there's a pin down the diagonal. Not necessarily a move that you want to play in many cases if you cannot follow it up with E5, but it does allow the possibility. Short has a couple of ways of playing the position. E4 is one of them. The other one is to just play C4 in kind of an English position. Of course, you can develop the knight or double fianchetto.
G3, double fianchetto. Preparations out the window here. Now bishop to G2 and D5 by Kasparov, clamping down on that square. Knight to F3. C5, taking over the space. A weird hybrid reverse King's Indian with a pawn on B3. What do you make of this position?
Well, this position with the colors reversed supposed to be a little bit better for the side with the pawns in the center. So with the extra tempo, probably White's doing okay, but surely he cannot be better.
And how does he decide where he puts his pawns in the middle of the board?
Usually
like
it's E3, C4. You don't have a lot of choices. You have to go either E3, C4 or E3, D4 are really the only ways of playing this position. And it goes to a double fianchetto already in some positions, except it gives black a couple more options. For example, if C4 happens right now, the move D4 would go into a reverse Benoni.
And Knight E5 has been played.
Now, that idea, even though it's common, is just kind of trying to equalize. It's already black that's a little bit on the driver's seat. After a move like Queen C7, allowing the doubling of the pawns, or Knight takes E5, it feels like black's a little bit better. A more common idea in the Queen's Indian would be bishop d7.
D7 has played. Let's see if we can get the analysis board up to catch up with these players. But Kasparov moving quickly, and this is what we expected from them in this game. And it looks like our analysis board is not quite working right now. So we will stay on this image off the board. Knight to e5, c4 has been played now, and Kasparov in thought with 4-06 and ticking down. What should he do with the black pieces? And d4 now. d4 played on the board. This is not a pawn sacrifice because his queen is always protecting the pawn on d4 through the bishop on d7. So d4 opening up lines, and now full trades on c6, causing some pawn problems for Kasparov in the position. But this kind of looks good for black.
Well, it depends on what kind of structures you like to play. Some people would prefer it to be white because of the long-term alternatives. For example, if I can somehow manage to play queen f3, rook d1 at some point, maybe play against the double pawns in the c file, it looks okay.
So queen d7 has been played, followed by queen to e2. The queen may think about the h3 square, queen to h3, swinging over to the king side, but that queen on the second rank is definitely ready to defend. So
it's a very important defender. At some point, an idea like e4, f3 has to come into play in order to swing the queen to g2 in case anything gets too difficult. I think
white's and a capture on e3, keeping the game dynamic and allowing his pawns to be weakened, but going after that d pawn after the capture on e3 back, and then rook to d8, and now h5 by Kasparov, and he's in his element, it looks like, trying to attack, but definitely giving up some slight weaknesses in order to do so.
Slight weaknesses. This pawns on c5 and c6 will die if we ever get into an endgame. But the problem is, will short survive that long? h5 is coming. This queen side is undeveloped, which cannot help the king in the next few moves. Short has to hurry up and actually get those pieces into play.
And he has with the move knight to c3, and now knight g4.
Of course, Kasparov's smelling blood in this position. He wants to put pressure on d3, e3, g3.
And he's threatening knight takes e3 at the moment.
Exactly.
He wants
knight
that pawn on e3.
Is immediately a threat, followed by the pin on d4. Therefore, I mean, short has to be already very careful. Kasparov much better with his time management.
And knight a4 dealing with
a very multi-purpose idea. It wants to trade off this bishop for the powerful one on g7. It threatens the pawn on c5. It's a very good square for the knight. It's exactly where it wants to be. Unfortunately for short, I think that after bishop takes b2, he does have to take with the knight.
Yes, because the queen is defending the pawn on e3. So the knight will go, but the knight will still be thinking about going back to a4.
Exactly.
So,
and it does protect d3 in case I need the rook for something else.
Looks like black will be able to white will be able to reshuffle in that position. That's a great move now that we look at it a little bit longer. Knight to a4 may have shut down Kasparov's initiative. This plan of knight g4 tactically looked good, but in the long term, after one move, it looks like his initiative has been soaked up by this nice move. Knight to a4 and bishop takes, and now knight takes on b2, and queen to e6, attacking the pawn on e3, but the rook's free to move now. Rook over.
Right, this is what we were talking about. The knight on b2 now holds d3. There's no problem putting the rook on e1, allowing the other rook to actually do the defensive duty on d1.
And h4 by Kasparov, sacrificing a pawn to rip open the white king side. How does white rearrange his position to get any play here? It looks as though a capture will happen on g3. I don't think he wants to take that pawn.
Well, he can. He has to deal with the fact that king g7 and a quick rook h8, rook takes h4 is in the works. But if he can kick out the knight and maybe defend the pawn on h4 with the queen, it might be playable. It's not something that he really wants to do, though. However, having a pawn on g3 as a weakness and the h file being opened anyways, it's also not something he wants to allow. Kind of a, pick your poison kind of position.
Dynamically holding the position together is Kasparov, and the pawn has been captured on h4.
Right.
And Kasparov sat up in his chair when he saw that happen, and it looks as though he does have the maneuver with king to g7, followed by rook over, and he's just stopping to think now. Both of them know that the tension has really risen dramatically after that move, and king g7 is on the board, a rook threatening to go to the h-file. The clock time's looking fairly reasonable at the moment. This now starts to look like a serious blitz game.
Right, and it's, again, we're going to say this over and over again, but this looks a little unpleasant for Nigel. It's just, he's not on the initiative. He has the long-term prospects because of the weaknesses of the pawns, but he still has to survive. It's very easy to play with black. The rooks are coming in. He needs to figure out a way to hold his position together. He's shown incredible amount of resourcefulness.
His last two moves, queen g2 and after rook h8, queen to g3, but now rook to h5, looking to double on the h file.
It simply increases the pressure. You cannot hold on to h4 forever. The rook on h5 is also a multi-purpose idea with the defense on the pawn on c5 at some point. And if I need to, well, maybe even g5.
This looks good for black.
This looks really good for black.
This is money for black. This looks like, what is he supposed to do? He played h3 now, chasing the knight away, but that just seems like a temporary blocking of the
solution.
dam. The knight can go to great squares. What's wrong with e5? He's thinking about, yeah, there it is.
Knight
Knight to
e5, of
e5,
course.
attacking the pawn.
Attacks on d3, attacks on f3.
Thanks for the tempo.
It's a beautiful, beautiful
And white's
position.
piece is doing absolutely nothing. Black totally dominating here.
Rook d1
Rook
is played.
to
I
d1.
can take on h4 immediately, I believe. I don't see anything wrong with that.
That's a nice move. Rook takes h4. You can't take back because of the
Knight
fork
f3 check.
on f3.
And importantly, the rook itself defends against d4. First of all, because I have this, well, I don't have this intermediate move, but I can, wait, actually, does d4 work? Because if I take, there's this problem with the knight on e5. I'm thinking, maybe not so clear.
So d4 looks like the break that he wants to play. So maybe you can't take yet, and he has doubled
Yeah, he
instead
doubles.
on the
Maybe
h file.
maybe there was some problem with
And
d4.
there's d4, and the driving the knight all the way back to d7. That has to be a mini success for white for sure.
Well,
And now knight to d3,
The
and
most-
suddenly
the most important thing is the knight comes back to the defense. The knight that looked completely out of play is suddenly defending the h3 pawn. It's going to be part of the...
And surprisingly, he's put it on F2 instead of F4.
It's a little more solid on F2. It doesn't have to worry about getting kicked out with a move like E5. I think it's a good practical decision, even though, of course, it's more passive.
Now, if that black knight could somehow appear on E4, the game would be over. I mean, that would just be
it's only
all
one
she
move
wrote.
away.
Oh, and knight F6
Knight
has happened. So knight E4 is a huge threat. He has to deal with this idea.
Maybe he trades off queens immediately with queen E5, but it seems a little bit of a desperate action. He doesn't want to ruin his pawn structure like that. The problem is, does he have anything better?
And now at 121 is Kasparov, 131, and counting down is Nigel Short on the defensive. Black in all the games. It looks like trying to win, although not necessarily with the better position. But we see here, queen to E5 has been played.
Now, there's a couple of options here. I could take on H3 because I think it would be suicidal to do this. Take on H3 and queen takes H3.
And he has taken on
right.
H3.
And after queen E6, he has the intermediate move, rook G3 check.
Now, what does that mean for his pawn structure, though, in the long run? Queen E6, rook check, king over,
Right, but
and
it's
now
a free
takes.
pawn. And also the king on F1 still feels uncomfortable. He still has somewhat of an initiative. I don't know.
Can he take on C5 now as white? Will that not win a pawn back?
It does, but I would be worried about rook F8, kind of using this pin.
And king to E2 has been played, keeping his pawn structure together, but allowing Kasparov to penetrate with his rook, and now a rook has landed on the H2 square in the heart of white's position. Rook H1 trying to eject the intruder.
No choice but to trade off those rooks. If you let them live, they would just tear you apart. So.
And no, that's not happening just yet. Rook to rook HG2 now.
Knight G4 is a very big threat because it attacks both the F2 knight and the E3 pawn.
Big problem, and Short finds himself under a minute, 52 seconds with the threat. Knight to G4, that's a big time move. How do you stop it, in fact? Rook to F1, fully on the defensive.
Yeah, but
and
knight
now
G4
the knight
anyways.
can go to G4 anyway, and now E3 is under attack. You can't defend E3.
No, you cannot. The thing is, if you can survive without it, he plays the move rook H4.
And Kasparov smells blood. Rook takes on E3,
King
king
D2.
over, and now...
It feels like after pawn takes D4, you have the move rook
why can't
G4,
you
and this
just-
is the idea.
Oh, rook to E4, guarding everything and threatening. Knight takes on F2.
Very nice little
This
idea.
is over. That's a killer shot.
That looks completely
Kasparov is going to
winning.
force resignation on that move. There is no move to play. No way to deal with the threat unless he
Well,
sacrifices.
he could play maybe king C1. But then rook takes
King
f2.
Yeah. Well, now he has sacrificed and taken on c5, but
Right,
now
but this is completely-
endgame is just totally lost. He's tied hand and foot. He can't move the knight. He can't move the rook. And he has
Yeah,
resigned.
he has resigned.
What a display by Kasparov.
Very nice attack on the
Bouncing
king side.
back after that last game where he actually flagged. He played like a beast. That's the Kasparov of old. Just from the start, sacrificing a pawn, playing along that H-file, and just cooking up an amazing attack, even after the queens came off the board.
Absolutely
just
beautiful.
blowing him off.
Absolutely beautiful. I really like this rook takes h3 move. I had mentioned it before he played it. The idea is that if queen e6, it seemed like his pawn structure was ruined, but actually because of the f-file opening, the king had to run away immediately, allowing the rooks just enough time to penetrate, and a beautiful rook move on the g-file, preventing the rooks from being traded off. Knight g4 unstoppable, and the rest was history.
That was style. What
was
a
very
game
nice
by
style.
Kasparov. Just impressive. You didn't see where the big mistakes were. If there were mistakes, there were positional errors.
Right.
It wasn't like serious tactical errors. Maybe Short could have played a bit more accurately, but from what we saw, that was Kasparov in his element, with the black pieces on top of it, just playing like just a boss.
No,
Just
there was no
serious
question.
chess.
His initiative started and it never ended.
Yeah, and he showed it right from the opening. You know, play that Mickey Mouse B3, G3 stuff on me. I'm just going to take over the center. I'll give you weak pawns if you want. I'm still going to come and attack. And his moves just all showed it. And he was confident that game. It was incredible.
It was a great display. He played a little faster now. He had plenty of time to actually bring the victory home. And I think that he displayed some of the best chess I've seen in Blitz. And it was just very precise, killer chess.
Very classy way of playing by Kasparov. And now let's take a look at the score as Game 3 in this great match goes to Kasparov. Although, yeah, there we are. Game 3. This seems like the graphic is not quite correct here because we see a win and a draw. We haven't played 4 games, have we?
No, I believe we've only played 3.
I believe we've only played 3 games.
No, it does look right.
Oh, the bottom one is still to be determined.
Right,
Okay, my
exactly.
apologies there. So, reading it correctly, that is right. It is 2.5, 1.5 to Garry. Black has won all the games so far. What's up with that? Well, we know it's Blitz. Anything can happen. There is no normal trend, especially in such a short match.
Look, when you're playing b3, g3, you're no longer playing with white.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, you're accepting the black
You're
pieces.
accepting the
And
black
Garry did
pieces.
play like he had white pieces. He just took over the center with pawns and.
Right, he actually played the normal white plan of bishop d2 normally, bishop d7 in this case because the colors were reversed, and he just crushed. As if he had the white pieces, had an initiative, and won.
The thing about it, too, is one thing about Kasparov that has been his calling card is when he loses a game, watch out the next game. He's not the kind of guy who loses a game and says, well, a draw would be okay, get my mind right, I have the black pieces. He said, no, I'm winning the next game. You should not have beaten me. You woke up a monster. And it looks as though Short has definitely woken up this beast from Baku, who is the monster with 1,000 eyes, as Tony Miles, the late Tony Miles, a great British Grandmaster, compatriot of Nigel Short, once said. And Short felt the power of Kasparov in that game. And he can't let this turn into an avalanche. I mean, he loses this game today, and he just feels like it's going to be rough tomorrow.
He needs to come back. He needs to actually have a good display of chess. The problem is that even in the game that he won, he was really outplayed. So, he showed a very nice resourcefulness surviving the first game in the rapid. And ever since, it just seems like he's not really putting any pressure on Kasparov from the board.
Exactly.
He's not really doing much. He's just kind of letting Kasparov dominate the board.
I mean, we're talking about a player who's 2670, I believe his rating is. He's the oldest player in the top 100 in the world is Nigel Short. He's 49 years old, but he's 60th in the world. So he's still an elite player. But imagine, again, I say, if Garry Kasparov had continued playing, the way he plays chess, there's no question, in my mind, that he'd be a top 10 player. I'm not sure that he will be able to handle a Magnus Carlsen young and in his prime, but I think that Kasparov, much like Karpov did before him, could show, even at a later age, I can still play. Now, he doesn't want to. He's gone on to brighter things. He's gone on to politics, which he maybe not the best decision for him, but he's also gone into doing some work in the Kasparov Chess Foundation in Africa and in other places. He's more an ambassador of the game, trying to spread the joy of chess all around the planet, and that's a worthy cause. But there are a lot of people who are wondering, what if this guy was still making some moves? He's sort of like Jack Nicklaus in golf. Everybody's going to look at him as a legend for the rest of his life. One of the great players, one of the great performers in our game.
He's definitely a person that's exceeded being a chess player and a world champion. He's an ambassador to the game, he's a representative of our sport, and he's done great contribution to chess. But sometimes just seeing him play can make you happy. This guy, he's on another level. Kasparov, you know, he can be 20 years retired. He's still Kasparov.
He is still Kasparov. He still follows modern chess, and he still plays the same way. You see his character. I'm sacking a pawn, screw the pawn structure. I want an attack. I play for the initiative. What endgame? If it's an endgame, it's going to be mate. I'm going to be winning material. He still has that same attitude that it's all about the initiative, which is why people were attracted to this style. He's just, and he's not initiative like crazy initiative at all costs. It's always rooted in positional principles, very solid, and a lot of energy and precise moves to show why it is that he can sacrifice and prove. Oh, usually that pawn. It's usually a pawn sacrifice is his calling card, just for the initiative.
He has proved beautiful understanding of chess. It's not just that, you know, the style of Mikhail Tal where you just sacrifice. No, this guy, he plays good positional chess. It's sound, it's solid, it's good. And on top of that, he's attacking. It's like, what do you do?
He learned against Karpov. I mean, he tried to do that nonsense against Karpov, and Karpov spanked him in the first match, and, you know, he was coming back in that first match they played. But then after that, he learned his lessons, and from then on, that solidity in his play, plus the dynamism, has been a calling card. Short looks a little flustered. Kasparov looking very confident right now with the white pieces going into the last game.
Yeah, he needs to not lose this game. He needs
well,
to.
At least Short looks like he's in joyous spirits, joking, as is his wont. But the Brit could get knocked out right now. I mean,
he's a strong player. He's not going to
player.
allow it. He knows what the situation is. He's played a ton of matches. He knows what the situation is psychologically, and I think that this is going to be the game where he tries to prove that he's still Nigel Short. He's still playing good play.
Let's see it.
Great chess.
They have started, and d4, knight to c6, back in the shady part of town. d5, d4, d5, playing again, trying to get Kasparov out of book. I'm kind of intrigued by this idea. You know,
We have a Chigorin, I believe.
but playing these sidelines, remember we were talking about the theoretical challenge that might face Kasparov because he's been out of the game for so long. Because Nigel seems to me to be helping Garry by playing these kind of offbeat lines.
Yeah, I wonder why he's doing that. I'm might be not so much that he's playing Garry, but that he's playing blitz, and he sometimes likes playing this offbeat kind of stuff in blitz, at least online, because he feels a little comfortable in this kind of situation, especially, you know, Garry maybe doesn't play the Chigorin all the time, even when he was playing chess. So maybe he's not so familiar with it. On the other hand, I mean, every time that I see this position on the board, I mean, I'm pretty happy. This is already slightly better for white, according to opening theory.
And it's not like Garry has to dig deep and find some major advantage. After all, he's got the white pieces. Now he has the two bishops, which is typical of this defense. It's like, okay, maybe I have only a slight edge. Maybe I don't win the game easily after any play. Maybe I don't have any just immediate opening of the position and cracking your skull open. But I got play, and I just played the move Queen B1.
It's an unusual move because usually the queen goes to B3, but I guess that here Garry has a reason to put it on B1 instead. Maybe some ideas with Queen E4 or Queen F5 check, depending on the situation. I'm kind of wondering, because here the exchange of queens is actually really bad for black. I'm wondering if on castles he can play something like just Queen F5 check.
And he has castled. He has castled, and Kasparov.
I mean, it's not a move that I would seriously consider, but it might be a resource.
Well, there it is. Queen F5 check. It looks like a lot of greed in this position.
Maybe a little too much.
Yeah, let's take a look at it, though, really quickly before Kasparov moves. I doubt he will take this pawn.
Yeah, and I don't want to play rook d7 because of the idea of bishop h3.
Most definitely not.
So you want to retreat and go king here. And now the idea queen takes f7, it just looks a little too greedy with the king still in the center.
Central. That's not happening.
That's not going to happen.
That is not happening. I mean, but in the meantime, Kasparov has to find another way to play. I don't think he's taking that pawn. I mean, he wants to be the one on the attack for the pawn.
Not the other way around.
Not the other way around.
A very typical pawn sacrifice in these structures is after you put the bishop on g2 and something happens like 97, you can go f4, pawn takes, and e4. It's a very typical idea of the situation. It severely weakens the pawn on f4 and allows you to play e5 in some positions, but it's usually done with the queen on d1, since the queen can go to f3 and put more pressure on the pawn. I'm not entirely sure what the plans are when the queen's on b1.
Well, he's played f4 immediately. He's played it right away.
Okay.
And now takes on f4, and we'll see what the point is of this maneuver. He's going to play the check. He has played
does
check.
play the check.
And maybe his plan is to play e4 after king to b8. Maybe that was
it does kind
No,
of.
he has actually taken. He has taken and allowed a potential fracturing of his structure, and that has occurred. And the white pawns on the king side look horrible, but he does have the two bishops to compensate for it.
Right, it depends on how well black can blockade on the light squares. If I can blockade on the light squares and kill the dark square bishop, black's way better. But the question is, do I have time to set this up? Because white's going to play bishop g2, rook
White has
b8.
played f3. f3, preparing to bring his king to f2. I got to tell you, this looks very unusual from White's standpoint to create this particular structure. His bishop now can't go on that long diagonal and do anything.
It's definitely unusual. I'm not entirely sure what the plan is. It's a little uncomfortable for black to find moves sometimes, because if I play knight d5, you simply go c4.
Well, he has played knight d5, and he's daring you to play c4.
I guess he's daring him because of knight b4, and there's some problems with the d4 square and knight c2 check.
And now king to f2 has been played.
Right, you need to play that before.
And now black has played knight over to b6.
Right, the idea is that now I have the idea knight a5, c4, and you cannot play c4 yourself because the pawn on d4 is hanging.
Interesting maneuver, but f5 has been played in response quickly by Kasparov as well.
Kind of wondering what f5 is for besides liberating the bishop. That might be the only point.
And it looks like the main point, and knight to e7, attacking that pawn on f5, and now bishop to d3, and curious what these knights are planning to do.
Knight e7 is a little bit of a curious move, because if you're not able to take on f5, why exactly did you play knight e7 when the knight was headed so obviously to c4?
Well, he's got c5 in now with the bishop on d3, and it looks like he's planning to somehow win a pawn, but that's opened up a line also towards his king. The bishop can always go to f4 at some point. At the moment, it doesn't look special, but Kasparov digging into this position as he realizes black is trying to get away from the bind. If black can somehow get some play, he'll be okay.
It's a fight. It's definitely a fight. The bishops on d3 and d2 are just a little bit awkward. White needed an extra move to solidify them with the rook on d1, but I don't know. You don't want to open the position when you're playing against a pair of bishops.
And is this a pawn sacrifice? Bishop to
It's not a pawn sacrifice, because if
e4,
you take twice,
the capture, one capture has been done so far.
if you play it twice, bishop c3 regains on
And
g7.
the second capture has been done, allowing bishop to c3.
So that did happen, and you're going to regain your pawn on c3. So it's not a pawn sacrifice. And it's actually really unpleasant for black, because
It's surprising he did it so quickly. What is he planning to do now?
I'm not sure.
I mean, I love those bishops. Rook to a4 has been played, tying down the white rook.
Bishop g7, I'm assuming, unless f6 is a move. Does f6 win material? I don't think so. Bishop e5 check might be a good intermediate.
Well, right now, Kasparov able to regain his pawn on g7.
Right, what I'm
if he
wondering
wishes.
is something along the lines of maybe bishop check, king a8, f6, takes rook e8, and then something like rook e1, or
Well, he
just
took
take on
immediately.
h7.
He took immediately instead on g7.
Okay. Also, of course, quite interesting.
And then rook to e8, bang down instantly.
Nothing else to play. Rook g8 didn't even come with the threat, so there's no point putting the rook on g8.
Right, because of the f6 move. So now those bishops look dominant. I mean, the bishop on e4
It looks very dubious for black.
looks wonderful, and the other bishop can go maybe to e5. The only thing black can hold his hat on right now is the fact that the pawn on a2 is hanging, but that's not much of a promise in this position. And now rook h to d1.
There's very serious problems. This knight on b6 cannot move because rook d7 penetrating and attacking b7 would be too difficult to deal with.
Now knight to c6 has been played, and rook to d6 with emphasis. You saw the way he put the rook on d6 and screwed it down on the square just a little bit.
It's just so powerful. The rook's coming to h6 and taking on h7 at least.
Oh, there's a lot here for white. Again, the only missing piece. The only missing element is that rook on a1, and black is desperately trying to figure out how to disturb white in some kind of way so that he pays attention to what he's doing instead of just going long. Can maybe the knight get to c4?
If you play knight c4, I was thinking rook takes c4.
Well, he actually has played.
But you have rook takes e4.
He's
so
played knight to c4. It's
if
on
you
the
take
board.
on c6, I think I can take on e4, so I don't think it loses material. Of course, you cannot take on c6 because I believe bishop takes c6 simply wins a piece, right?
He has taken on c6 at the moment, and rook takes on e4, and they're down the main line that you just analyzed. Rook takes on e4.
Well, I'm wondering, rook c5, what's the defense against rook c5?
Well, rook to c5.
Maybe b6. Because if you, you retreat onto, or maybe it's possible to retreat simply. I was kind of worried about bishop e5 check.
Well, the big
king
point
a8,
here,
rook
though,
here.
the big point here is the clock. I mean, the clock is now a huge factor. Is that e-pawn going to march down the board? It doesn't seem as though it's clear.
I don't think this is as good as having preserved the bishops, though. I think Kasparov would have done better simply by playing rook
And look
h6.
at this, he's given away the a-pawn to get his rook on the d-file. Check has been played, and now he's blocked the king from stopping this pawn from going any further, and he's looking to play e5 and e6.
It's dangerous.
This looks
It's very dangerous, and he's also looking. He's eyeing that pawn on f7. If he takes it, that would be two connected pass pawns that are basically unstoppable.
Now,
So-
black, by the way, will be looking to get as much food as he can. He can take on h2, but he's got to worry about this pawn on e5, and it's down the board. And now rook to d2, giving his king the opportunity to switch to the file. That's a smart-looking move for the moment, but now rook to c1.
Gaining a tempo on the knight is quite important. Also because in this precise moment, the knight has to retreat to b6.
And it has done so, and now rook to a1. Dancing back and forth is that rook, and chasing the king had to go to b7. For the moment, black is up a pawn, but it feels like he's down a piece because that e-pawn is threatening to become a queen.
Right, the issue for white is that if I do win a piece with the e-pawn, that might be my last pawn. You know, rook takes h2.
That is the issue, absolutely.
So
the knight can sacrifice itself for the pawn at some point, and he decided to hold on to his h-pawn.
Right.
h4 is in the position now, and Kasparov only has 33 seconds left on the clock, short with 2 minutes plus, up a pawn, but needed to figure out what to do about this pawn on e5, and now he's played c5, allowing the pawn to go one step forward, and after capture, he was looking like he was thinking about f6 for a moment there. How do you stop this pawn? It looks like your knight has to drop back, but the h-pawn is on the board. He might regret the fact that he didn't have a chance to take that pawn. And now the rook has gone passive completely all the way back.
it's a little passive. This definitely feels better for white. The question is, how much material am I going to get from my pawn on e6?
So will he be able to, but how does he get the h-pawn?
I don't quite understand why you put the rook on e8 immediately. I would have at least waited for white to commit to e7.
Look at this a5 now, cannot be captured because of knight to c4 check.
Pretty clever, but at the same time, we're talking about a full rook here after king f6, king f7.
Well, he can play knight d5 check though, and then rook e7 check. So that is a challenge, and he's played his rook to d1. That allows...
Precisely stopping the knight d5 check ideas.
But can he still play it maybe? Knight d5 and bring his king up? No, what am I saying? I was thinking knight c4, and I saw knight d5 also.
Yeah.
Brought his king up, and now you can't... Can you play king up to f6? What does knight d5
Knight
do?
d5
Is it a sacrifice?
I don't understand what Kasparov
No, it
did.
did not work, and he had to back up. But now that has created a real problem for him.
Well, now
at
the
least
knight's
it's threatening
definitely
the
better
knight.
placed on c7 because it at least will defend. But he was
He
a
played
little more
knight
ambitious.
e3, and now
Rook.
rook to d7. The problem is that bishop on g7 guards all those pawns queening. That's not an issue for white. At the moment, he can always use his bishop.
He's still threatening king f6, king f7.
So what does the knight do? And he's played a4, and there goes the pawn, and the king back and king up, and a perfect unit. That king and rook and pawn. This looks really bad for black. Knight f5, what a move!
Though. Knight d4 is coming. Knight e7 also maybe an idea. Sacrificing that knight.
And bishop to f6. Kasparov is only 14 seconds on his clock. The knight can be sacrificed, but the h-pawn is still on the board, so that doesn't look like a good idea. What should he play here? Knight d4 doesn't seem to work.
Well, is there an immediate threat?
There's no threat, it seems. No king takes yet.
But
and he's
knight takes
captured
c7,
immediately.
bishop
He
takes
decided to
c7.
capture.
It's an extra piece. I don't think that the pawns are powerful enough, not by a long shot.
And he's gotten behind the pawn, and now the C pawn he tried to go after, and now he's backing up. Will the A pawn be any kind of force in this position? And he's gone over to that side now, trying to get, but C4 looks playable here. But now he's blockaded.
But the pawns are blockaded now. It's a real issue. But can I sacrifice my rook on E7?
And now a complicated moment. And he has not sacrificed, and the pawn is all the way on H6, and the rook will drop back, and it looks like he will have no play whatsoever. He might have to play, he's played A3, king
has a
down.
little bit of play because his king's going to be stuck at least on the G file for a while.
And the bishop stopping the pawn from getting to the eighth, but is this enough? Can he play rook to D6 maybe? C3, blocking the whole line. The H7 pawn is off the board, and now the king moves. And how does black make any progress? He's checking now, bishop to G7, and black cannot figure out how to queen his pawn. And now H7 is on the board. Kasparov with only 14 seconds, but it looks over. King is moved.
Rook H1, but doesn't allow Nigel to sacrifice the rook.
And he has sacrificed the rook. Is this a drawn? Whoa! What did he do?
Wait, why did he play C2 instead of?
Why didn't he queen?
Oh, because he wants to queen the other way. But I think queening immediately was a draw, right?
That looked like a draw.
Because it's a C pawn.
Now it looks like he's going to lose. Queen takes, and he lost the game.
A1 was a draw.
A1 looked like a draw because of the C pawn. He blundered in this moment.
Am I missing something?
No, you're not. No, you're not. He could have queened, and Short missed after a heroic defense, missed a draw, and ended up losing the game. Amazing in the time pressure, and he had a lot more time than Kasparov did. We get to that moment. It was a simple book draw. If we take a look, as Kasparov has won today, in this moment here, if we could take a look at the analysis diagram, A1 looked like it was cleanly.
It was a very clean draw. The funny thing is that A1, queen. Now, the idea is that if you take on A1, king takes A1, H8, queen, this idea of C2 makes it in a book draw. C-pawns are a draw as long as the king is far away, and obviously G7 is about as far away as it gets. So this is actually quite an easy draw, very book draw. And I was wondering for just a quick second, what if you queen yourself? And I was wondering, well, maybe there's a perpetual, and then I realized, wait, just queen takes H1, queen takes
exactly.
H1, C2 is an easy draw.
Nothing to
This
think
is
about.
a known draw position.
He could have drawn in the time pressure. He had significantly more time on the clock as well.
I don't understand.
Just didn't make sense playing C2.
C2 didn't make
You just
any
set yourself
sense.
up. You set yourself up in the short term, in the long term, and now he's down 2 games. He's down 2 games in the match. Kasparov roaring back, and unfortunately for Short fans, Garry Kasparov has taken a big lead after one day. He is now up 3.5, 1.5, losing the second blitz game, but coming back in roaring style, winning that next game. And in this last game, who knows what was going on? I'm sure there were mistakes made on both sides, but Short did make that mistake that cost him the game. Well, the legends are on their way down, and while we wait, we will take a short commercial break. We'll be back after this.
The diner. What an exciting thing for the West End. It's not just about food, it's not just about chess. You know, it's a place for people to come and spend their day, hang out, and just kind of talk ideas. Before we move along, I just really want to say thank you to the chess campus and give it a round of applause.
Come on, you guys, help me out here.
What do you want us to do?
Well, you tell me. Let's see. On the count of 3.
Sure.
1, 2, 3.
Yes.
Come and forfeit someone. What would you like?
If you're a play, Kasparov, head over here.
Grandmasters Kasparov and Short. will step before your board. You'll make your move. They'll make their reply, and then wait until they come back around to you.
We've got a couple of simultaneous exhibitions, so I'm giving one, Gary's giving one. We're playing 20 opponents each. Well, it's mainly for fun, I would say.
It's always nice to accompany big events with simultaneous exhibitions because you can bring kids and chess fans to face Grandmaster at the board. I mean, not just to hear the story, not just to follow the games, but to also, move the pieces.
I have sat on the other side in these exhibitions a number of times, and those were important moments in my chess career.
It's a part of the promotion, and I hope they'll enjoy it.
Play chess? Of course I do. Is there anything beyond the wall?
Welcome to the showdown in St. Louis. A big round of applause for our players. The player who chooses the gold pen will have the white pieces in the first game. And Grandmaster Kasparov, if you would do us the honors of picking your poison. Garry chose the gold pen, so he'll have white in game one. Nigel, just to make sure I'm honest.
Yeah.
And I'm very excited to tell you that the Chess Club and Scholastic Center of St. Louis, in partnership with Norway Chess and the London Chess Classic, are announcing the 2015 Grand Chess Tour. We're very lucky to have been inspired in this project by Garry Kasparov. He's connected our three events and the organizers from each of them, and now we have the Grand Chess Tour.
You could fly to Venice, or Paris, or even Copenhagen. You could fly all over the world. But why? When you could just come to St. Louis. Your trip begins at ExploreSt.Louis.com.
Mr. Matheny, what's your favorite part about this sport?
I think the strategy.
How much do you hate to lose?
I don't like it at all.
What about being second guessed?
I don't like that either.
Well, if I were you, I wouldn't have moved that rook. Checkmate. Sorry.
Whether you've played chess for years or never before, come experience all the sport has to offer at the world-renowned Chess Club and Scholastic Center of St. Louis.
Well, we are back with the battle of the legends, world champion, former world champion Garry Kasparov, taking a big lead in this match. They are with us, the two fighters. Garry, first of all, congratulations on the way the games proceeded today, at least the results. How did you feel about your play?
I'm fairly comfortable because my biggest challenge is how to actually get myself ready for the game. And the game when I lost some time, simply I lost control. Not of the game so much, but the factor that you have to play, you have to push the clock. So
were you aware of the clock, that it was getting down that much?
No,
because
I was
it seemed
aware,
like you were
but
oblivious to it.
yeah, absolutely, yeah. So it's sometimes I feel disconnected from the clock again because it's a very little practice of playing these days. I mean, the last time I played rapid game was 6 years ago against Karpov in Valencia. So I played blitz more often, but still it's quite challenging. And I'm happy that I played a few good moves. I don't think we have one single good game, but there were some good moves, and I thought it could be worse.
Nigel, how did you feel about the games today? It seemed as though you were doing okay, maybe in the early stages, but then after that, it looks like he was pressuring you tremendously.
Well, I mean, obviously, I'm disappointed with my chess. So I've had some opportunities. I've been missing things. When you play blitz chess, everything's a question of form. And this varies greatly from day to day. And it can be, I know when I play chess online, I can have days where, my chess is like hundreds of points above other days. Today I was not at my freshest. I'm still suffering from jet lag. I've actually been up since 3 a.m. And the problem is, you've got to be incredibly sharp.
Especially to play against this guy.
Obviously.
But may I ask, though, you did choose some interesting openings. Let's call them that. I mean, it wasn't exactly like you were going down mainline theory.
Yeah, I've been playing some stuff, and we've had some interesting positions, and I think Garry's right. There've been a lot of bad moves. There have been some good moves as well. So it's been, some very interesting fights, actually.
Garry, you played a couple of attacking games in your style. You must have been proud of the game where you got to play h4 and your rooks came on the h file, and then even with the queen trade, you had a big attack. Were you proud of this game?
It's easier for me to play, the sharp game where I see straight lines, because again, when you're out of practice, it's extremely difficult, just to play, slow maneuvering game. And Nigel was right by dragging me into the positions where the lack of practice tells, and you could see it in game 3. But when it's, it's a sharp tactics, I mean, I'm still following games, I'm looking at a computer screen, and then, I could show my teeth.
Yeah, maybe that was your best game, actually. Maybe
the game 4, yes.
Yeah, the one where you
push h4.
Yeah. H4, push with that was a very impressive attacking game.
I think it was just again. I saw the lines, and then just I did quite well. So because I could save time. So
absolutely, we saw the clock feature into the battle quite a bit in some of the games. At least early on, did you guys get acclimated to the clock, Nigel, as it continued to proceed? Because it didn't seem like you were in any time pressure, at least later. The games were lasting longer and going into endgame.
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, I've never played with a delay in my life. Never any sort of important game. Okay, this is an exhibition game, but it's an important game, nevertheless. So that, I hadn't quite got the hang of that. So I've been playing quickly, and also, a little bit trying to exploit Garry's lack of practice. Put a bit of clock pressure on him. So I guess it was a conscious idea, but I missed a lot of things. I mean, I'm disappointed.
Your game 1 draw, though, was fantastic. I mean, how did you survive that one?
That was
a miracle. In the blitz, the rapid.
Yeah, I thought I was doing okay, and then suddenly I realized the position was precarious, and I could see suddenly bishop g5 was coming and queen g3 attacking e5, and then there was all sorts of ideas. I had this knight on b3, which looked very pretty, but was doing not a lot.
And there were no white pieces there.
Yeah, he's scorched earth.
We were stunned at the end when you managed to survive. You must have felt, Garry, that you had something there. Your attacking instincts
I was
must have been going on.
because this is the problem, this especially when you're just, you're out of, your best shape and form. It's, there's so many options, and this one and that one, and something probably could have worked, but I wasn't sure. So I don't know. Maybe as you said, queen h4 instead of queen f2.
in the
or Queen H4 immediately.
Queen H4 was a critic when he played King H8.
Yes, immediately
Queen H4.
Yeah, but you know, I was going to play. I was busy calculating F to X5 line.
Right.
And then it seems to me that I was winning Bishop F7, King H8, Bishop D5, Queen D6, take on D4, E5, right. Queen E7, and Queen H4. G5, Queen H6.
I'm sure the fans are not following all those complications.
I was calculating that. And you have two bishops, 2 knights, everything is hanging. But it's
and the clock is ticking.
Clock is ticking.
Yeah, that's it.
I think it's when we reach this end game with I had Queen and 2 bishops, and Nigel had Queen and Rook and Knight. I think at one point, I had to play Bishop D2. I mean, it's nice to have them on H6, but Bishop on C3, both bishops protected by pawns, and then I could, play even with little time. You can just put pressure.
Did you have a moment to do that? Because we were talking about
I think immediately when he played something like B5, so this is Bishop D2 immediately, Rook E8, Queen D4, and then I have time. The moment my Bishop on C3 and Bishop on F3, I'm absolutely safe, and then I could start.
Thinking.
Nigel, let me ask you. We're watching Garry play. You played him back in '93 in a big match. You played him many games.
Yeah.
What is your feeling about him as if he, in the fantasy, because many people have this fantasy, if he had continued playing, would he still be a top 10 player today?
Top 10 player for sure. Yeah.
For sure. Top 5 even?
Look, if Garry had been continued playing, for sure. I mean, he'd be a top player, no question. About it, but Garry basically had done everything there was to do in chess, so I can understand why he had set himself other goals in life, and it's normal. I mean, some people retire prematurely. He'd been there, been world champion for ages, won a ridiculous number of tournaments, and decided to move on. And he's a bit rusty now, and that's why I'm disappointed with my score. To be honest, I'm not at my best. Basically, a little bit too tired. That's
how do you recuperate now? Because you have a big match tomorrow. You have to finish the day tomorrow.
Well, I just hope I can sleep properly tonight. That's the only thing. If I sleep all right, then I'll come out fresh tomorrow.
Well, Garry, you had a great day today. Is there ever an itch to get back in the ring, or over the last 10 years since your retirement, any itch that you may have left too soon?
I learned from my great teacher Michael Botvinnik that you should be objective, analyzing your games and looking at the position, and also you have to be objective, analyzing your own potential. So I was very pleased to hear Nigel's comments about my ability to play today. Maybe top 10, maybe, but it's it requires something else, and I know that today to play. The young guys, and to stay on top requires so much energy, and
motivation,
motivation, and exactly. Nigel's right, motivation, and again after winning all these events, so what else I can do? Just now to play another tournament, and maybe hoping that I could compete with Magnus or Caruana. No, I'm quite happy with who I am now, with what I'm doing now. But sometimes I play chess, and I was very happy to have this offer to play here. It's a bit odd because this morning I didn't feel comfortable because it's like you're trying to prepare for the games. I mean, they're not real games. It's not the game that we have to make a lot of analysis, but it's like you're trying in 2 hours to accomplish something that you could have done in 2 years. So it's very odd, and still I'm nervous, of course, but I'm having fun.
I saw Garry at breakfast, and he was looking tense, honestly, really.
Yeah.
I saw him just, munching away, and I could tell there was some nerves there.
No,
for the-
there's a lot going on. The announcement yesterday about the Grand Chess Tour. Before I get to that, Nigel, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you if you've been distracted over the last few days by some of the news that came out about an article you wrote about women's chess.
That's true actually, because I mean this article, I mean it was a very, very strange story because it was published in New in Chess. It was out for a month. Nobody said anything about it apart from my comments on Susan Polgar. That was the only thing people spoke to me about it. And then what happened was there was a journalist in the UK. He went into a club. There is some sort of militant feminist there, and he showed her this, and then she went completely ballistic. And he thought, oh well, maybe this is a good story. And
it's become a media firestorm. I mean, you're coming from critics from every angle.
It's gone absolutely everywhere. I mean, if you've got 4 women, you know, talking about this on Fox and CNN, and it's been discussed.
But most likely without reading the article.
Yeah,
that's what's most amazing.
You know, there have been quotes, and I've seen them repeated all over the world. Girls don't have the brains to play chess. Nigel Short. Look at the article. Do I say that?
So
have I ever thought of that?
Do you feel you've been misrepresented by the media?
Grossly misrepresented. Grossly misrepresented. I mean, it's absurd. So, yeah, that has taken things a little bit of my energy away. I think my main problem is I came from Thailand, and you know I played in the Thailand Open, and it's not easy to get over jet lag. But you're right. This is an additional thing. And sometimes you let things get to you. It's strange because you know this match is a match between the most famous chess player in the world this week and Garry Kasparov. So I mean it's bizarre. I mean I've had people swearing at me on New Zealand television. I've had presenters calling me all sorts of rude things, and they haven't read the article.
So we want to clear up the record now as to your opinion, because taken the way it's been taken, it does seem as though it's somewhat sexist, and the attacks are what they are. I have read the article. I'm just saying
It's somewhat different, isn't it?
It's certainly different from the spin the journalists have put in. But I don't know if it's British humor or what.
It's not humor at all. I mean, what I said, first of all, it is a fact that men play better than women, and you've got 2 women in the top 100, and this basically hasn't changed much for a long period of time. This is I quoted some study. And it's been, the last 40 years, the difference between in rating between the top male players and the top female players hasn't really budged. And it's huge. It's very, very substantial. So, I said this, and it's obvious. I mean, there's, I've had support. I've had plenty of support, actually, from international female players, who've read the article, the ones who subscribe to New in Chess, and they say, well, I'm stating the obvious, and some people have interpreted it in a different way, saying I'm insulting women. Women can't play chess, and furthermore, they've been, saying that they shouldn't play chess, which is absolute nonsense. I'm saying exactly the opposite to that. So it's been interesting. It's been an interesting week. I mean, I just couldn't imagine that people would be discussing chess that much all over the world. this week. But of course, it's not really to do with chess. It's to do with women's status in society. You know, it's just.
Garry, do you have an opinion about what the week has been like and your thoughts on the matter?
Look, I agree with Nigel that first, before discussing the article, people should read it. Yeah, there's certain controversies, but at the end of the day, you know, Nigel's raising an issue that is not unknown in the world of chess, and my reaction was, you know, why people always concentrate on the game of chess. I mean, why nobody looks at, you know, other walks of life, you know, at architecture, at music, you know, you look at the composers, even the famous chefs in the restaurants. So there are very, very few women, if any. So, but now chess suddenly becomes, you know, the hottest.
Well, I mean, but he did say something about it, so
okay, but it's the okay.
it would attract attention.
Nigel was known, you know, for many years, for decades in the world of chess, for not being a good scholar of political correctness, and it's a debate. So I may slightly disagree with Nigel on the trend, because I still think, you know, whether Nigel quotes rating that the strengths of the players, you know, female players, improved, because 40, 50 years ago, I think 50 years ago, Bobby Fischer was boasting that he could give a knight.
Yeah, which was nonsense. Yeah. Which was nonsense. There are
and nobody's giving a knight to Judah Polgar. Nobody's giving a pawn.
No, but
to
it's
Judah
even probably at that time it would be. I mean, I would be very curious to see him giving a knight to young Nona Gaprandashvili. So,
sure.
But still, you know, it's in, you know, in the 60s, 70s, or in the 80s. You know, you could hardly, before Polgar's phenomena, you could hardly imagine, you know, just a female player, you know, making to top 10, and Judy did it.
But this is a discussion. I mean, what Garry is talking about, and here we're talking about details, numbers, you know,
statistics.
There was an excellent academic article by David Smurden, the Australian Grandmaster, and he looked into some of these studies, and you know, and he has said some different things. He's come to different conclusions on this, but the one thing he stated very clearly, you know, I'm not saying women are stupid, and I'm not saying they cannot play chess. I mean, nowhere do I say that. So anytime you see a quote like that, that is somebody putting words into my mouth. I never said that and never thought that. So yeah, there are discussions, and you know, why? There are obviously societal factors. We've had discussions about, you know, there is some sexism in chess. You can also argue things the other way. By the way, incidentally, you can say that women have certain advantages in chess. So if you are a 2500 player, for example, professional player, you are likely to make much more money if you're a female, just because you can play in the same open tournaments as the guys, but you also have women's only tournaments and you have women's only prizes as well. So, and they do have advantages. Yeah. I mean, I've seen arguments. I've heard people saying, well, you know, they should have common championships, common Olympiads. I said, we have common championships, common Olympiads. I mean, so women can play on the Olympiad if they're good enough, and occasionally you get players, you know, from time to time they make it to the men's team, but there are advantages for them that they can also play actually on a lower level in the women's events.
Well, I'm sure this is a controversy that's not going to be settled here or go away. Give you an opportunity to...
I'm very happy, you know, for people to talk about it, but don't put words into my mouth and read the damned article, you know, before. So that's all I can say about that.
All right, well, let's redirect the issue to this match and how great it is. Garry, you're up 2 games. When you're in that state, this kind of match, what are your thoughts going into tomorrow's game?
Oh, Look, it's a game after game, so it's not about the overall score. Of course, I would like to win the match, but we'll play game by game. So, and I hope, actually, I'm almost confident we'll have the same fighting chess tomorrow. So I enjoy very much playing, because this was for so long that I was denied this pleasure, and I will try to play as good as I can tomorrow.
Well, we look forward to you two legends playing a great match tomorrow. Thanks so much for joining us. And we would like to invite you all to come back tomorrow as the Battle of the Legends continues here in St. Louis, the capital of chess in the United States. We'll see Grandmasters Garry Kasparov and Nigel Short entertain us once more with these scintillating games. I'd like to thank Grandmaster Alejandro Ramirez for joining us, and we will sign off. See you tomorrow at 1:50 Central, 2:50 Eastern, right back here at USChessChamps.com.